When ceremony architect Rowan Hale was hired to orchestrate the most important political wedding in frontier history, she had one rule: stay invisible. But when the ruthless Alpha King Alaric Thornvale began watching her instead of his bride, everything she'd built began to crumble. What happened next in that cathedral shocked 400 nobles and changed the realm forever. Stick around until the end to see how one woman's impossible choice rewrote the future of an entire kingdom. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The northern wind screamed across the stone battlements of Ironhaven Keep like a beast denied entry. Inside the great hall, Rowan Hale stood perfectly still before the most dangerous man in the borderlands. King Alaric Thornvale didn't look at her. Not yet. He was reading her contract, slowly, methodically, while she stood 3 paces from his throne with her leather portfolio clutched against her ribs. The firelight threw shadows across his angular face, and every few seconds his jaw tightened as if the words on the parchment personally offended him. Rowan had orchestrated 17 high-profile ceremonies across the frontier provinces. She'd navigated blood feuds, rival houses, and drunken warlords. She knew how to read power, and this man radiated it like heat from a forge. "You don't negotiate fees," Alaric said finally. His voice was low, controlled. Not a question. "No, Your Majesty. You don't accept creative input from clients." "Correct. And you require full authority over venue, vendors, and scheduling. Down to the minute." He looked up then. His eyes were pale gray, sharp as winter steel, and they locked onto hers with an intensity that made her spine straighten involuntarily. "Most planners beg for royal commissions," he said. "You dictate terms like a merchant guild." "Most planners fail, Your Majesty." "I don't." A flicker of something. Amusement? Irritation crossed his face. Then he signed the contract with a single brutal stroke and tossed it across the table toward her. "You have 9 weeks," Alaric said. 400 guests. Half of them want me dead. The other half want to see if I'll flinch when I marry a woman I've never met. I need this ceremony flawless. Not good. Flawless. Rowan retrieved the contract without breaking eye contact. "Then stay out of my way." The silence that followed could have cut glass. Alaric's chief advisor, Lord Veyron, a skeletal man with ink-stained fingers, actually gasped. 2 guards shifted their weight near the door. No one spoke to the Alpha King like that. Not if they valued their position, or their teeth. But Alaric didn't move. He just studied her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. Then, impossibly, he smiled. "I look forward to working with you, Miss Hale." Rowan left Ironhaven Keep with the signed contract, a royal seal, and a growing sense that she'd just made a terrible mistake. The cobblestone streets of the capital were slick with early spring rain. Merchants hawked smoked fish and wool cloaks from stalls that leaned against ancient stone walls. Ironhaven was a fortress city, built over centuries to withstand sieges, storms, and the brutal winters that defined the northern borderlands. It wasn't beautiful, but it was strong, just like its king. Rowan shook the thought away and ducked into a tavern called the Iron Nail. It was the kind of place where conversation stopped when strangers entered. She ordered black tea and spread her planning materials across a corner table. 9 weeks. 400 guests. A political marriage designed to unite 2 rival provinces and prevent a war that had been brewing for a generation. No pressure. Rowan pulled out her first checklist, venue acoustics. The ceremony was set for the Cathedral of the First Flame, a massive structure built into the side of a granite cliff. Beautiful, historic, and according to her initial site survey, an acoustic nightmare. Vows spoken at the altar would echo into mush before reaching the back pews. She made a note. Commission sound baffles, test with live speaker. Next, floral arrangements. The bride, Lady Alara Greymore, was from the southern plains where wildflowers grew in riot. But Ironhaven's climate killed anything delicate. Rowan would need to import blooms by the cartload and keep them alive in a city that felt like it was carved from frozen stone. Hire 3 florists, redundancy critical. Then, seating arrangements. This was where things got dangerous. 400 nobles meant 400 egos. Rival houses had to be separated by at least 3 rows. Former allies who'd betrayed each other needed sightline barriers. And certain warlords couldn't sit near exits, or they'd leave mid-ceremony to make a point. Rowan had spent the last 2 weeks mapping bloodlines, old grudges, and tactical alliances. Her seating chart looked like a military campaign. She was double-checking the placement of House Varel when a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're the planner." Rowan looked up. A woman stood beside her table, tall, blonde, dressed in traveling leathers that were expensive but worn. Her expression was unreadable. "I am," Rowan said carefully. The woman sat down without asking. "I'm Mira Ashford, captain of the King's Vanguard." Rowan had heard the name. Mira Ashford was a legend in the borderlands, a fighter who'd earned her rank by surviving campaigns that killed half her unit. She was also, according to rumors, one of Alaric's closest confidants. "What can I do for you, Captain?" Mira leaned back in her chair and studied Rowan like she was assessing an opponent. "I'm here to tell you something no one else will." "I'm listening." "This wedding is a trap." Rowan's hand stilled over her notes. "Excuse me?" "Not literally," Mira said, "but close enough. Lady Alara's father, Lord Greymore, brokered this marriage to secure a trade alliance. But half the houses invited to the ceremony hate Greymore. The other half hate Alaric. Put them all in one room. And you're not looking at a wedding. You're looking at a powder keg." "I'm aware of the political tensions," Rowan said coolly. "That's why I was hired." Mira's eyes narrowed. "You think you can manage 400 armed nobles with a seating chart?" "I think I can manage them better than anyone else you could have hired." For a moment, Mira just stared at her. Then she laughed, sharp and humorless. "You've got spine, I'll give you that." "Was there something else?" Mira stood, adjusting the sword at her hip. "Just this. Alaric doesn't want this marriage, but he'll go through with it because he thinks it's the only way to hold the realm together. So do your job. Make it perfect. And maybe, we all survive the next 2 months." She left without waiting for a reply. Rowan sat alone in the tavern, staring at her notes. Alaric doesn't want this marriage. She told herself it didn't matter. Kings married for power, not preference. Her job was to build the ceremony, not question it. But something about Mira's words stuck like a thorn. The next morning, Rowan returned to Ironhaven Keep for her first venue inspection. She arrived at dawn with a team of 3 assistants, 2 acoustic specialists, and a master carpenter. The Cathedral of the First Flame loomed above them like a sleeping giant, its facade carved directly into the cliffside, its stained glass windows glowing faintly in the early light. Inside, the space was breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings stretched 40 feet overhead. Stone columns lined the nave like ancient sentries. And at the far end, the altar sat beneath a massive circular window that depicted the founding of Ironhaven in ruby and gold glass. Rowan walked the length of the cathedral slowly, her footsteps echoing. "Test the acoustics," she said. One of her assistants, a young man named Callum, walked to the altar and spoke in a normal voice. "Can you hear me?" The words dissolved into a muddy echo before reaching Rowan. "Unacceptable," she muttered. She turned to the acoustic specialists. "I need baffles installed along the upper columns, and we'll position secondary speakers near the rear pews. I want every word crystal clear." They nodded and began measuring. Rowan continued her inspection, noting sight lines, lighting angles, and structural weak points. She was halfway through her checklist when a voice called out from the entrance. "Impressive, isn't it?" She turned. King Alaric stood in the doorway, silhouetted by morning light. He wasn't wearing his formal regalia, just a dark tunic and boots. He looked younger without the crown, more human. "Your Majesty," Rowan said, inclining her head, "I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to see the progress." He walked toward her, his boots clicking against the stone floor. "And I wanted to apologize." That caught her off guard. "For what?" "For yesterday. I was harsh. You didn't deserve that." Rowan studied him. Up close, she could see faint scars along his jawline, remnants of old battles. His expression was careful, guarded. But there was something underneath, something tired. "You're under a lot of pressure," she said simply. "That's no excuse." For a moment they stood in silence. Then Alaric looked up at the vaulted ceiling. "I used to come here as a boy. My father would bring me on winter solstices. I thought this place was magic. And now? His smile was faint, bitter. Now it's just stone. Rowan didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Alaric turned to her. Tell me honestly, can you make this work? The ceremony? All of it. She met his gaze. If you let me do my job, yes. He nodded slowly. Then I'll stay out of your way. But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked to the altar and ran his hand along the stone edge. What do you think of her, Lady Alara? Rowan hesitated. I haven't met her yet. But you've seen her portrait. I have. And she's beautiful. Yes, she is. Alaric's voice was flat, empty, and accomplished, and politically valuable, everything a queen should be. He turned back to Rowan. Do you believe in love, Miss Hale? The question hit like a slap. Rowan's jaw tightened. I believe in contracts, Your Majesty, and commitments. Love is unreliable. Unreliable, Alaric repeated. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's one word for it. Before Rowan could respond, Lord Veyron appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, the advisor called. The council is waiting. Alaric sighed. Of course they are. He looked at Rowan one last time. Thank you for your honesty. Then he left. Rowan stood alone in the cathedral, her heart beating faster than it should. Do you believe in love? She forced herself to turn back to her checklist. It didn't matter what she believed. She had a wedding to plan. Over the next 3 weeks, Rowan barely slept. She worked 18-hour days coordinating vendors, negotiating with noble houses, and solving crises that erupted like brush fires. A shipment of wine was delayed by bandits. 2 rival dukes demanded the same seat. A seamstress quit after the bride's mother insulted her stitching. Rowan handled it all with ruthless efficiency. But there was one problem she couldn't solve. King Alaric kept appearing. At first she thought it was coincidence. He'd stop by the cathedral during her inspections, asking questions about lighting or floral arrangements. Then he started attending her planning meetings with the vendors. Then he began staying late, long after Lord Veyron and the other advisors left. And they talked. Not about the wedding, about everything else. Alaric told her about growing up in Ironhaven, learning to fight before he could read, watching his father wage wars that never seemed to end. He told her about the weight of the crown, the impossible choices, the nights when he wondered if holding the realm together was worth the cost. Rowan, against every professional instinct, found herself talking too. She told him about her childhood in the eastern provinces, where her mother had been a seamstress and her father a cartographer. She told him about learning to see patterns in chaos, about building her business from nothing, about the satisfaction of creating something perfect in a world that was anything but. And slowly, without meaning to, they built something fragile between them. A connection, a warmth, a pull. It was the 5th week when everything changed. Rowan was in the cathedral late one evening, adjusting the placement of the ceremonial candles. The space was empty except for her and the flicker of candlelight against stone. She heard footsteps behind her. You're still here, Alaric said. She turned. He stood at the edge of the nave, still dressed in his council robes. He looked exhausted. So are you, she said. He walked toward her slowly. I couldn't sleep. Bad meeting? They're all bad meetings. He stopped a few feet away. Rowan, I need to ask you something. Her pulse quickened. He'd never used her first name before. What is it? Alaric hesitated. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. Do you ever feel like you're building something that isn't meant for you? Rowan's breath caught. She knew exactly what he meant. Every day, she whispered. Alaric stepped closer. Then why do we keep doing it? Because it's what we're good at. Is that enough? She didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. And then Alaric reached out and touched her hand. It was barely contact, just his fingers brushing hers, but it sent a shockwave through her entire body. I can't stop thinking about you, he said quietly. Rowan's throat tightened. Your Majesty. Alaric, just Alaric. Alaric. His name felt dangerous on her tongue. This can't happen. I know. You're getting married in 4 weeks. I know. To someone else. I know. His voice cracked. But it doesn't change how I feel. Rowan pulled her hand away. Then you need to stop feeling it. Can you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Rowan wanted to lie. She wanted to say yes, to tell him this was just proximity and stress and nothing more. But she couldn't, because the truth was she felt it too. The pull, the warmth, the impossible, reckless hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something real between them. It doesn't matter what I feel, she said finally. You have a kingdom to think about, an alliance to protect. I'm just the planner. You're not just anything. Alaric reached for her again, but this time she stepped back. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. Please. For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he nodded and turned away. I'm sorry, he said, and then he left. Rowan stood alone in the cathedral, surrounded by candles and flowers and the framework of a wedding that was never meant to be hers. She pressed her hands to her face and tried not to cry. The next morning, Lady Alara Greymore arrived in Ironhaven. Rowan watched from a distance as the royal procession entered the city, carriages flanked by armed guards, banners snapping in the wind, crowds cheering from the streets. Lady Alara was everything the portraits promised. Tall, graceful, with auburn hair and a smile that looked practiced but genuine. She waved to the crowd like she'd been born for this role. And maybe she had. Rowan forced herself to look away. That afternoon, she met with Alara for the first time. The bride-to-be was warm, polite, and startlingly perceptive. You're the one who's been running this entire operation, Alara said, shaking Rowan's hand firmly. I've heard nothing but praise. Thank you, my lady. Please, call me Alara. She smiled. We're going to be spending a lot of time together over the next few weeks. I'd rather not stand on ceremony. Rowan liked her immediately, which made everything worse. They spent 2 hours going over final details. Dress fittings, processional music, vow phrasing. Alara had opinions, but she deferred to Rowan's expertise without hesitation. I trust you, Alara said simply. This is your craft. I'm just the subject. As they wrapped up, Alara paused at the door. Can I ask you something personal? Rowan's stomach tightened. Of course. Do you think you'll be happy, Alaric? The question felt like a knife. I think you'll do what's best for the realm, Rowan said carefully. Alara's smile faltered. That's not what I asked. For a moment they looked at each other, two women caught in a situation neither of them had chosen. I don't know, Rowan admitted finally. Alara nodded. Neither do I. Then she left. Rowan stood alone in the planning room, staring at her notes. He'll do what's best for the realm. She repeated it like a mantra. Because if she believed it hard enough, maybe she could convince herself it was true. The days that followed became a careful dance of avoidance. Rowan threw herself into the final preparations with almost manic focus. She rechecked every detail twice, then 3 times. The sound baffles in the cathedral, the timing of the processional, the exact temperature the wine needed to be served at the reception. She worked until her hands shook from exhaustion and her eyes burned from reading contracts by candlelight. Anything to avoid thinking about Alaric. But the city wouldn't let her forget. Ironhaven had transformed itself for the royal wedding. Banners in the colors of House Thornvale and House Greymore hung from every building. Merchants sold commemorative ribbons and painted portraits of the happy couple. Street performers acted out romantic ballads about star-crossed lovers finding their destiny. The irony was suffocating. Rowan was crossing the main square one morning when she heard raised voices near the fountain. A crowd had gathered around 2 men arguing, one in the crimson livery of House Greymore, the other in Thornvale black. Your king is a coward, the Greymore man spat, hiding behind a marriage contract instead of facing Lord Greymore like a man. Watch your tongue, the Thornvale guard shot back. King Alaric has more honor in his smallest finger than your lord has in his entire corrupt bloodline. Rowan saw the punch coming before it landed. The Greymore man's fist connected with the guard's jaw, and suddenly the crowd erupted. More guards pushed forward. Merchants scattered. A woman screamed. Rowan backed away quickly, her heart hammering. This was exactly what Mira had warned her about. The wedding wasn't uniting the realm. It was barely holding the peace together with thread and prayer. She needed to report this. She found Captain Ashford in the keep's training yard, drilling a unit of soldiers through sword formations. Fight broke out in the square. Rowan said without preamble. Greymore and Thornvale guards. Mira dismissed her unit with a sharp gesture and turned to Rowan. Injuries? Broken nose, maybe a cracked rib. Could have been worse. Mira wiped sweat from her forehead. How many more weeks until this damn ceremony? 3. We'll be lucky if we make it 2. Mira's expression darkened. Lord Greymore arrived this morning. He's already making demands. What kind of demands? The kind that make my job harder. Mira gestured toward the keep. Come on, you should hear this yourself. They found Lord Greymore in the main council chamber, standing before a massive map of the frontier provinces. He was a barrel-chested man with silver hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. 2 bodyguards flanked him, both armed, both watching everything. Lord Veron stood nearby, looking pale and uncomfortable. Ah, Miss Hale, Greymore said when Rowan entered. The famous planner. I've heard remarkable things about your organizational skills. Thank you, my lord. I have a small request regarding the ceremony. Rowan's instincts prickled. I'm listening. Greymore gestured to the map. I'd like to adjust the seating arrangements. Several of my key allies should be positioned closer to the altar, and I think it would be appropriate if my personal guard were stationed at the cathedral exits. Every alarm in Rowan's mind went off at once. The seating chart is finalized, she said carefully, and the cathedral security is Captain Ashford's responsibility. Of course, of course. Greymore's smile widened. But surely, a few minor adjustments wouldn't compromise your vision. They would. The smile vanished. Miss Hale, Greymore said, his voice dropping to something colder. Do you understand what this wedding represents? This alliance will control trade routes across 3 provinces. It will determine who holds power in the borderlands for the next generation. My daughter is marrying a king. I think I'm entitled to a few accommodations. Mira stepped forward. Your daughter's marrying King Alaric, not you, and Miss Hale's authority over this ceremony was granted by the king himself. If you want to change her decisions, take it up with him. Greymore's jaw tightened. Perhaps I will. He left with his guards in tow, his boots echoing against stone. When the door closed, Veron let out a shaky breath. That man is dangerous. Tell me something I don't know, Mira muttered. She turned to Rowan. You just made an enemy. I made an enemy the moment I took this contract, Rowan said. At least now he knows where I stand. But her hands were trembling when she left the council chamber. That night, Rowan worked alone in her planning office, a converted storage room in the keep's east wing. Papers covered every surface. Fabric swatches, seating diagrams, vendor contracts, backup plans for the backup plans. She was reviewing the processional timeline when someone knocked. Come in, she called without looking up. The door opened, closed. Rowan glanced up. Alaric stood in her doorway. She nearly dropped her quill. Your Majesty, I heard about your meeting with Greymore. Alaric stepped inside, and suddenly the room felt impossibly small. Are you all right? I'm fine. He threatened you. He postured. There's a difference. Alaric moved closer, his expression tight with something Rowan couldn't quite name. Anger, concern, something else. You shouldn't have had to face him alone, he said. I wasn't alone. Captain Ashford was there. That's not what I meant. The air between them felt charged, electric. Rowan forced herself to look back at her papers. Was there something you needed, Your Majesty? Stop calling me that. It's protocol. It's a wall. Alaric's voice roughened. And I'm tired of walls. Rowan's throat tightened. You should go. I know. But he didn't move. Instead, he reached out and gently turned her chair so she faced him. His hand lingered on the armrest, close enough to touch, but not quite. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said, Alaric said quietly. In the cathedral. About building things that aren't meant for us. Alaric, I've spent my entire life doing what's expected, what's necessary, putting the realm before everything else, before myself, before... He stopped, his jaw working. And in 3 weeks, I'm going to stand at that altar and marry a woman I barely know because it's the right political move. Because it will prevent a war. Because it's what a good king does. Rowan's chest ached. Then that's what you have to do. Is it? His eyes searched hers. What if there's another way? There isn't. How do you know? Because I've seen the seating chart. I've watched the rival houses circle each other like wolves. I've heard the rumors about border skirmishes and trade disputes and old blood feuds that go back generations. Rowan's voice cracked. This wedding is the only thing holding the realm together. If you walk away from it, everything falls apart. And if I go through with it, I fall apart. The words hung between them like a confession. Rowan stood abruptly, putting distance between them. You're scared, that's normal, but you'll adjust. Lady Alara is intelligent, kind, capable. She's not you. The room went silent. Rowan's breath caught. Don't, she whispered. Please don't say that. Why not? It's true. Because it doesn't matter. Her voice rose despite herself. What we feel doesn't matter. You're a king. You don't get to choose based on feelings. You choose based on duty. And what about you? Alaric challenged. What do you choose? I choose to do my job. That's not an answer. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. It's the only answer I can give you. For a long moment, Alaric just looked at her. Then he stepped back, his expression closing off. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. This was inappropriate. He turned toward the door. Alaric, wait. But he was already gone. Rowan sank back into her chair, her whole body trembling. She'd done the right thing. She knew she had. So why did it feel like she'd just lost something irreplaceable? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Guest after guest arrived in Ironhaven, each with their own demands and grievances. Duke Varen wanted his seat moved because it faced east and the morning sun hurt his eyes. Lady Morwen insisted her servants be allowed in the cathedral during the ceremony. Baron Kellis brought 3 times the allowed number of guards and refused to dismiss them. Rowan handled each crisis with practiced efficiency, but the pressure was building. She could feel it in the tightness of conversations, the way nobles watched each other across crowded rooms, the undercurrent of violence that thrummed beneath every polite exchange. And underneath it all, she felt Alaric's absence like a physical wound. He'd stopped attending planning meetings, stopped visiting the cathedral. When they passed each other in the keep's corridors, he nodded politely and kept walking. It was exactly what she'd asked for. It was killing her. 1 week before the wedding, Rowan was conducting a final walkthrough of the cathedral when Lady Alara found her. Can we talk? Alara asked. Something in her tone made Rowan's stomach drop. Of course. They walked to a quiet alcove away from the workers installing floral arrangements. Alara looked tired, Rowan noticed. The practiced smile had faded, revealing something more fragile underneath. I need to ask you something, Alara said, and I need you to be honest with me. All right? Does Alaric love you? The question hit like a physical blow. Rowan's mouth went dry. My lady, please don't lie to me. Alara's voice was gentle but firm. I've watched the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's paying attention, and I've seen the way you avoid him. Something happened between you. I need to know what. Rowan wanted to deny it, to deflect, to maintain the professional distance she'd worked so hard to build. But Alara deserved better than lies. Nothing happened, Rowan said carefully. But there were feelings on both sides. We didn't act on them. Alara nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Do you love him? It doesn't matter. That's not what I asked. Rowan closed her eyes. Yes. The word felt like surrendering. When she opened her eyes, Alara was watching her with an expression that was impossibly sad and impossibly kind. I thought so, Alara said quietly. She looked away, toward the stained glass windows. You know, when my father arranged this marriage, I told myself it didn't matter that Alaric and I barely knew each other. Political marriages are common in the borderlands. Love can grow over time, or at least partnership can. It can, Rowan said. But that requires both people to be present. Alara's voice cracked slightly. And Alaric's heart is somewhere else. He'll honor his commitment to you. I know he will. Oh, I'm sure he will. He'll stand at that altar and say the vows and wear the crown and play the role of devoted husband. He's too disciplined to do anything else. Alara turned back to Rowan. But we'll both know it's a performance, and I'll spend the rest of my life married to a man who wishes I was someone else. So guilt crashed over Rowan like a wave. I'm sorry, I never meant... I know. Alara reached out and squeezed Rowan's hand. This isn't your fault. Or his. Sometimes the right thing and the happy thing aren't the same, and people like us don't get to choose happiness. Then what do we get to choose? Alara smiled sadly. Dignity, grace, making the best of impossible situations. She released Rowan's hand. The wedding will be beautiful. You've done extraordinary work, and in a week it will be over, and you can leave Ironhaven and never think about any of this again. She walked away, leaving Rowan standing alone in the alcove. The worst part was that Alara was right. In 1 week, Rowan would finish her contract. She'd collect her payment, pack her things, and return to her quiet life in the eastern provinces. The wedding would become just another entry in her portfolio, another successful commission, and Alaric would become just another client she'd never see again. The thought made her want to scream. 3 days before the wedding, everything went wrong. Rowan was in the cathedral overseeing the installation of the ceremonial candles when a messenger burst through the doors, gasping for breath. "Miss Hale, you need to come to the keep immediately." She ran. The main council chamber was in chaos when she arrived. Lord Greymore stood at one end of the long table, his face purple with rage. Alaric stood at the other, his expression carved from ice. Between them, a dozen nobles shouted over each other. Mira intercepted Rowan at the door. "Don't go in there." "What happened?" Greymore found out about the Western trade agreements, the ones Alaric negotiated last month. Rowan's blood went cold. The ones that cut Greymore's tariff revenues by 40%? Those would be the ones. Inside the chamber, Greymore's voice rose above the din. "You negotiated behind my back, undermined my house's income, and you expect me to give you my daughter?" Alaric's response was dangerously calm. "I negotiated agreements that benefit the entire realm, not just your personal treasury. You betrayed our arrangement. I honored our arrangement. You're the one who's been secretly arming border militias and threatening neutral trade caravans." The room went silent. Greymore's face went from purple to white. "You accuse me of treason? I accuse you of exactly what you are, an opportunist using this wedding to consolidate power." Alaric stepped forward. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you really believe I'd hand you the keys to the kingdom just because I'm marrying your daughter? You gave your word, and I'll keep it. The wedding will proceed as planned. Lady Alara will become queen, but you," Alaric's voice dropped to something lethal, "will never control this throne." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Greymore smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd been planning for this moment. "In that case," he said softly, "I withdraw my consent." The words echoed in the sudden silence. Veyron gasped. "You can't!" "I can, and I am. Without my blessing, there is no marriage. Without the marriage, there is no alliance." Greymore looked around the room at the assembled nobles. "And without the alliance, I suspect many of you will reconsider your loyalties." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several nobles exchanged glances. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension. Alaric's hands clenched at his sides. "If you walk away from this wedding, you'll start a war." "Then perhaps," Greymore said, "it's a war that needs to happen." He swept from the room, his guards following. Half the nobles went with him. Rowan stood frozen in the doorway, watching the realm fracture in real time. The wedding was 3 days away, and it had just been canceled. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, Greymore's forces had withdrawn from Ironhaven. The caravans that had brought wedding guests south were suddenly heading north again. Nobles who'd pledged loyalty to the Union began quietly packing their things. Rowan stood in her office, staring at 3 weeks of meticulous planning rendered meaningless in a single conversation. All of it, the seating charts, the floral arrangements, the carefully negotiated compromises, was worthless now. Someone knocked on her door. She didn't bother asking who it was. She could feel his presence before he spoke. Alaric entered without waiting for permission. He looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he said. Rowan turned to face him. "For what?" "For wasting your time. For dragging you into this disaster. For—" His voice broke. "For all of it. You did what you had to do." "Did I?" Alaric laughed bitterly. I just destroyed the only chance at peace this realm had. Half the provinces are going to side with Greymore. The other half will demand I retaliate. By this time next month, we'll be at war. Then you'll face it, the way you faced everything else. Alone. The word hung between them. Rowan's chest tightened. She knew she should stay silent, should maintain her professional distance, should let him leave and never look back. But she was so tired of choosing duty over truth. "You're not alone," she said quietly. Alaric looked up, and the raw hope in his eyes nearly broke her. "Rowan, I don't know how to fix this," she interrupted. "I don't know how to stop a war, or mend a broken alliance, or undo what's been done. But I know you're not alone. Not anymore." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was desperate, inevitable, and completely reckless. And for the first time in weeks, Rowan stopped fighting what she felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alaric pressed his forehead to hers. "What are we going to do?" he whispered. Rowan's mind raced. The planner in her, the part that saw patterns and solutions and ways forward, suddenly clicked into gear. "I have an idea," she said, "but it's insane." "Tell me." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "What if the wedding still happens?" Alaric blinked. Greymore withdrew his consent. "There's no bride." "What if there's a different bride?" Understanding dawned slowly across his face, then shock, then something that looked almost like terror. "Rowan, you can't be serious. 400 guests are already here. The cathedral is prepared. The contracts are signed." Her words came faster now, the pieces clicking together. "If you marry me instead of Alara, you send a message to every noble in this realm. You don't negotiate with extortion. You don't bow to threats. You choose your own path. They'll call it madness. They already think you're mad for standing up to Greymore. Half of them will refuse to recognize the marriage. And the other half will see strength, leadership, a king who won't be controlled." Alaric stared at her. "This could start the war even faster. Or it could end it before it begins," Rowan countered. "Greymore's leverage was the wedding. If you marry someone else, someone with no political connections, no ulterior motives, no houses to satisfy, you take away his power. You'd be stepping into a firestorm. I've been in the firestorm for weeks." "Rowan," Alaric gripped her shoulders, "if we do this, there's no going back. Every enemy I've made will become your enemy. Every threat against me will become a threat against you. Your life will never be your own again." She met his gaze steadily. "It stopped being my own the moment I fell in love with you." Something in Alaric's expression shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. "Are you sure?" he asked hoarsely. Rowan thought about her quiet life in the eastern provinces, her independence, her carefully built reputation, everything she'd worked for. Then she thought about walking away from this man and never seeing him again. "I'm sure," she said. Alaric kissed her again, softer this time. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Then let's get married." The decision was made in the space of a heartbeat. Now came the impossible part, making it real. Rowan and Alaric spent the rest of the night in her cramped planning office, mapping out a strategy that felt equal parts brilliant and suicidal. They needed to move fast, before Greymore's withdrawal became common knowledge, before the remaining nobles lost faith completely, before the fragile thread holding the realm together snapped. "We announce it tomorrow," Alaric said, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. "A private audience with the remaining council members. Then a public proclamation." "That gives us 2 days before the ceremony," Rowan calculated. "Not enough time to change the printed programs or the floral arrangements, but I can adjust the processional and—" "Rowan." She looked up. Alaric had stopped pacing. He stood in the center of the room, backlit by candlelight, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Are you doing this because you love me?" he asked quietly. "Or because you think it's the only way to save the realm?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Because the truth was complicated, messy. Both things were true, and neither was the whole story. "I'm doing this," she said finally, "because walking away from you would break something in me I don't think I could fix. And because I've spent 3 weeks watching this realm tear itself apart over a wedding that was never about love or partnership, just power. Maybe, maybe it's time someone chose differently. Alaric crossed to her and took her hands. You understand what you're giving up? The anonymity, the freedom, the life you built. I understand. And you're still willing? Rowan squeezed his hands. Ask me again in 2 days, see if I've changed my mind. He smiled, small but genuine. You won't. How do you know? Because you're the most stubborn person I've ever met, says the king who just torpedoed his own political marriage. They both laughed, and for a moment the weight of what they were about to do lifted just enough to breathe. Then reality crashed back in. We need allies, Rowan said, shifting back into planning mode. People who'll stand with us when the announcement is made. Who do you trust absolutely? Mira. Veyron, despite his nervous disposition. Commander Thane of the Eastern Garrison. Lady Vesper from the coastal provinces. She's always been more interested in trade stability than political games. Rowan pulled out a fresh piece of parchment and started making notes. What about the nobles who came for the wedding? How many will stay? Hard to say. Maybe a third. The rest will follow Greymore or flee to neutral ground. A third of 400 is still over 100 witnesses. That's enough to make this legitimate. She tapped her quill against the paper. We'll need new vows. Personal ones. Not the political language we had prepared for Alara. Can you write them? Can you recite them without reading? Alaric's smile turned wicked. I've spent 3 weeks memorizing every word you've ever said to me. I think I can handle wedding vows. Heat flushed through Rowan's cheeks. She cleared her throat and focused on her notes. Right. Vows. I'll draft something by morning. What about rings? The royal signet can be resized, and there's a band that belonged to my mother. It's simpler than what we commissioned for Alara, but I don't need elaborate. I know, Alaric's voice softened. That's one of the things I love about you. The word, love, settled between them like a promise. Rowan looked up from her notes and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. We're really doing this, she whispered. We're really doing this. The realm is going to lose its mind. Let it. She laughed despite herself. You're supposed to be the responsible one, the king who puts duty above everything. I've been the responsible one my entire life. Maybe it's time I tried something reckless. Marrying your wedding planner 2 days before you were supposed to marry someone else definitely qualifies as reckless. Then we're well matched. Rowan stood and crossed to him. This time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper. A promise of all the impossible tomorrows they were choosing together. When they finally broke apart, Alaric rested his forehead against hers. No matter what happens, he said quietly, no matter how bad it gets, I won't regret this. I won't regret you. Good, Rowan whispered, because there's no turning back now. The council meeting the next morning was exactly as brutal as Rowan had anticipated. Alaric summoned his closest advisors to the small council chamber, just 8 people, including Mira and Veyron. Rowan stood beside the king, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. I've asked you here, Alaric began without preamble, because I'm about to make a decision that will determine the future of this realm, and I need to know if you'll stand with me. Veyron's face had already gone pale. Your Majesty, if this is about Greymore's withdrawal, it's not about Greymore. It's about the wedding. Alaric's voice was steady, controlled. The ceremony will proceed as scheduled, but there will be a different bride. Silence crashed through the room. Lady Vesper, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, spoke first. Different how? Alaric reached for Rowan's hand. I'm marrying Miss Hale. The explosion was immediate. Veyron actually stumbled backward. Commander Thane's jaw dropped. 2 of the lesser advisors started talking over each other in frantic whispers. Only Mira remained calm. She looked at Rowan, then at Alaric, then back to Rowan. A slow smile spread across her face. About damn time, she said. Everyone turned to stare at her. What? Mira shrugged. Anyone with eyes could see this coming. I'm just surprised it took you this long to do something about it. Captain Ashford, Veyron sputtered. This is treason, political suicide. The king cannot marry a commoner with no house, no title, no ulterior motives. Alaric cut in. No private armies, no trade agreements or border disputes or generations of grudges. Just a woman I trust, a woman I love, a woman who sees me as a man, not a crown. The nobles will revolt, Thane said, though his tone was more thoughtful than panicked. Some will, Alaric agreed. Others will see an opportunity. Greymore held too much power. His withdrawal removes a threat as much as it removes an alliance. Lady Vesper leaned forward, her expression calculating. You're gambling that the realm will respect strength over tradition. I'm gambling that the realm is tired of watching powerful men make decisions based on greed instead of good governance. Alaric's voice hardened. Greymore tried to use this wedding to control me. I'm showing him, and everyone else, that I can't be controlled. By marrying your wedding planner. Veron looked like he might faint. By marrying the woman who's proven herself more capable, more loyal, and more essential to this realm's future than any noble bride could ever be. Alaric squeezed Rowan's hand. Miss Hale has spent 3 weeks managing 400 impossible personalities, preventing 3 potential duels, and keeping this ceremony on track despite every obstacle the Borderlands could throw at her. If she can handle that, she can handle being queen. Rowan's throat tightened. She'd been so focused on the political ramifications that she hadn't fully processed what Alaric was saying. Queen. She wasn't just marrying the king. She was stepping into a role she'd never prepared for, never wanted, never imagined. But when she looked at Alaric, she saw something that made the fear worthwhile. She saw partnership, trust, hope. I need to know, Alaric said, addressing the room, who stands with me. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because you believe this is the right path forward. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mira stood and placed her fist over her heart in formal salute. I stand with you, Your Majesty. Commander Thane rose next. As do I. Lady Vesper followed. You're either the bravest king I've ever served or the most foolish. Either way, I'm curious to see how this plays out. You have my support. One by one, the others stood. Even Veyron, though he looked like he was preparing for his own execution. Only one advisor remained seated, Lord Brennick, an older man with deep ties to the southern provinces. I cannot support this, Brennick said quietly. I have served your house for 30 years, Your Majesty, but this decision will tear the realm apart. I cannot be part of it. Alaric nodded. Then you're dismissed with my gratitude for your years of service. Brennick stood, bowed stiffly, and left. When the door closed behind him, Alaric turned to the remaining council members. We have 48 hours, he said. 48 hours to prepare for the biggest gamble any of us will ever make. Commander Thane, I need you to secure the cathedral. Triple the guard presence. No one gets in without verification. Lady Vesper, reach out to the neutral houses. Let them know the wedding is still happening and their attendance will be, appreciated. Veyron, I'll handle the formal announcements, Veyron said weakly, and start drafting contingency plans for when everything goes wrong. That's the spirit, Mira said dryly. Alaric turned to Rowan. And you need to finalize the ceremony details. Everything has to be perfect. It will be, Rowan said, with more confidence than she felt. Because perfect was relative. And in 2 days, she was either going to help save a kingdom or watch it burn. The news spread through Ironhaven like wildfire. By midday, the entire city knew that King Alaric was marrying his wedding planner instead of Lady Alara Greymore. The reactions ranged from shock to outrage to dark amusement depending on who was talking. Rowan heard the whispers everywhere she went. A commoner? Has he lost his mind? She must have seduced him, used some kind of spell. This is what happens when kings forget their duty. Greymore's going to march on the city, mark my words. She ignored them all and focused on work. There was no time for doubt, no time for second thoughts. She had a ceremony to finalize, and every detail had to be flawless. She was in the cathedral adjusting the altar flowers when she heard footsteps behind her. You have courage, a woman's voice said. I'll give you that. Rowan turned. Lady Alara stood in the nave, dressed in traveling clothes. She looked tired but composed. My lady, Rowan said, her stomach sinking. I didn't expect to see me still in the city? Alara walked closer. I leave tomorrow. My father's already gone, of course, stormed off in a rage, but I wanted to stay long enough to see how this ends. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to. I know. Alara's expression was unreadable. And for what it's worth, I think you're brave. Possibly insane, but brave. You're being far kinder than I deserve. Am I? Alara looked around the cathedral, at the flowers, the candles, the carefully arranged seating. You built all of this, every detail, every contingency. And now you're stepping into the center of it, knowing full well that half the realm wants to see you fail. I'm just trying to survive, Alara finished. I understand. Better than you think. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I wanted to give you something, a wedding gift. Rowan took the pouch hesitantly. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet set with a single pale blue stone. It belonged to my grandmother, Alara said. She gave it to me when I was young and told me to wear it on my wedding day, for courage. Rowan's eyes stung. I can't accept this. You can, and you will. Alara closed Rowan's fingers around the pouch. Because you're going to need all the courage you can get, and because I think Alaric chose well, even if he chose selfishly. He didn't. He did. And that's all right. Kings aren't supposed to be selfless all the time. Sometimes they're allowed to be human. Alara smiled sadly. Just promise me something. Anything. Make it worth it. The chaos, the scandal, the war that's probably coming. Make it worth all of that. Rowan's throat tightened. I'll try. Then that's enough. Alara turned and walked toward the cathedral doors, but before she left, she looked back one last time. For what it's worth, she said, I hope you're happy, both of you. Then she was gone. Rowan stood alone in the cathedral, clutching the bracelet and trying not to cry. The final day before the wedding passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Nobles who'd stayed in Ironhaven began taking sides, some publicly supporting Alaric's decision, others quietly preparing to leave. The city itself felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Rowan worked until midnight, making final adjustments. She rewrote the vows 3 times before she was satisfied. She coordinated with Mira on security protocols. She reviewed every single contingency plan until her eyes burned, and through it all she wore Alara's bracelet like a talisman. Near midnight, Alaric found her in the cathedral for one final walkthrough. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you. Can't, too much to think about. They stood together in the empty nave, surrounded by flowers and candlelight and the weight of tomorrow. Are you scared? Rowan asked. Terrified. Good. So am I. Alaric took her hand. Last chance to run. You first. He smiled. Not a chance. They stayed there for a long time, just holding hands in the silence. Finally, Alaric spoke. No matter what happens tomorrow. Don't, Rowan interrupted. Don't make promises about tomorrow. Just be here with me tonight. So they were. And for a few stolen hours, the world outside the cathedral ceased to exist. Morning came too quickly. Rowan woke in her quarters to the sound of bells ringing across Ironhaven. The wedding day had arrived. She dressed slowly, deliberately. Not in the elaborate gown that had been prepared for Alara, but in something simpler, a dress of deep blue silk that one of the royal seamstresses had altered overnight. It was elegant without being ostentatious, regal without screaming for attention, exactly what Rowan needed. She clasped Alara's bracelet around her wrist and took a long look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked determined, terrified, ready. A knock sounded at her door. Come in, she called. Mira entered, wearing her formal captain's uniform. The cathedral secured. 200 guests confirmed attendance. The others fled in the night. 200 is enough. It'll have to be. Mira studied her. How are you holding up? Ask me in 3 hours. Fair enough. Mira's expression softened. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Even if it starts a war. Wars were coming anyway. At least this way, Alaric has someone at his side who actually gives a damn about him. Mira adjusted her sword belt. Ready? Rowan took a deep breath. Ready. The walk to the cathedral felt surreal. Citizens lined the streets, some cheering, some silent, some openly hostile. Rowan kept her head high and her expression calm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Inside the cathedral, 200 nobles filled the pews. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Every eye tracked Rowan as she entered through the side door and made her way to the staging area. She could hear whispers, feel the judgment, sense the anticipation. They were waiting to see if she'd break. She wouldn't. At precisely noon, the ceremonial bells rang. The great doors of the cathedral opened, and Rowan stepped into the light. The processional music swelled as she walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, no attendants to flank her. Just her, walking toward the altar where Alaric waited. He looked magnificent in his formal regalia, but what struck her most was his expression when he saw her. Pure, unguarded joy. The whispers faded as she reached the altar. Alaric took her hands, and the entire cathedral seemed to hold its breath. The officiant began the ceremony, but Rowan barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Alaric's steady gaze, the warmth of his hands, the impossible reality that this was actually happening. Then came the vows. Alaric spoke first, his voice carrying through the cathedral with absolute clarity. I stand before you not as a king making a political alliance, but as a man making a choice. Rowan Hale has shown me what true partnership looks like, built not on obligation, but on trust, not on power, but on truth. I pledge my loyalty, my protection, and my heart to her, not because duty demands it, but because I cannot imagine my future without her in it. Rowan's turn. Her voice shook slightly as she began, but grew stronger with each word. I came to Ironhaven to build a ceremony. Instead, I found something I wasn't looking for. A man who saw past my carefully constructed walls and reminded me that some things are worth the risk. I pledge my strength, my counsel, and my unwavering support. Not because a contract binds me, but because choosing you is the freest thing I've ever done. The rings were exchanged. The officiant pronounced them married. And when Alaric kissed her, the cathedral erupted, some in applause, some in shocked silence, some in barely concealed outrage. Rowan didn't care, because for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt like she could breathe. They turned to face the congregation together, hand in hand. And in that moment, standing at the altar she'd designed, surrounded by flowers she'd chosen and nobles she'd seated, Rowan realized something profound. She'd spent her entire career building perfect moments for other people. Now, finally, she'd built one for herself. The reception was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a siege. Rowan stood beside Alaric in the keep's great hall, watching 200 nobles navigate the most politically dangerous event in a generation. The room was divided into clear factions. Those who'd publicly supported the marriage stood near the high table, raising their goblets in carefully worded toasts. Those who remained neutral clustered in corners, watching everything with predatory interest. And a third group, smaller but more volatile, gathered near the exits, their expressions ranging from contempt to barely concealed fury. "Smile," Alaric murmured under his breath. "They're waiting for you to crack." Rowan lifted her chin and smiled. The first toast came from Lady Vesper, who raised her glass with practiced grace. "To King Alaric and his new queen, may their union bring the realm the strength it desperately needs." The words were diplomatic enough to satisfy both sides. Goblets lifted, wine was drunk, but the tension in the room didn't dissipate. Then Duke Varen stood. He was an older man, with a silver beard and eyes like chips of ice. His lands bordered Greymoor territory, and his loyalty had always been questionable. "A toast," Varen announced, his voice carrying across the hall, "to unexpected choices and their consequences." The room went silent. Alaric's hand tightened on Rowan's. "Easy," he whispered. Varen continued, his smile sharp as a blade. "We gather today to witness history, a king setting aside political wisdom for personal desire. One can only hope the realm survives such romance." Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with undisguised interest, waiting to see how Alaric would respond. But it was Rowan who spoke. "Duke Varen," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I appreciate your concern for the realm's stability, but perhaps you could direct that same energy toward the border skirmishes your men have been conducting on neutral territory for the past 6 months?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Varen's face went rigid. "I beg your pardon?" "The raids on the eastern trade routes, the burned caravans, the merchants who've disappeared." Rowan met his gaze steadily. "Did you think the king's wedding planner only paid attention to flowers and seating charts? I've spent 3 weeks reviewing security reports and incident logs. Your house appears quite frequently. Mira, standing guard near the high table, didn't bother hiding her grin. Varen's jaw worked. These are baseless accusations. Commander Thane has the documentation, Alaric said smoothly. We can review it together after the reception if you'd like, or you can sit down and enjoy the wine. For a heartbeat, Varen looked like he might explode. Then he sat. The message was clear. The new queen had teeth. But Rowan knew she'd just made another enemy. And in the borderlands, enemies were dangerous. The reception dragged on for hours. Rowan smiled until her face hurt, accepted congratulations from nobles who clearly didn't mean them, and navigated conversations that felt more like verbal knife fights than pleasantries. By the time the guests finally began departing, exhaustion had seeped into her bones. You were magnificent, Alaric said as they escaped to a private balcony overlooking the city. I called out a duke in front of 200 witnesses. Exactly. Magnificent. He pulled her close, and for a moment they just stood together, breathing in the cool night air. Below them, Ironhaven sprawled across the valley, a fortress city built to survive anything the borderlands could throw at it. Torches flickered in the streets, guards patrolled the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled midnight. What happens now? Rowan asked quietly. Now we find out if the realm respects strength or punishes defiance. That's not reassuring. Alaric's smile was grim. It wasn't meant to be. They stayed on the balcony until the cold drove them inside, neither willing to voice the fear both of them felt. The attack came 3 days later. Rowan was in the council chamber reviewing supply reports when Mira burst through the doors, her armor splattered with mud and blood. Greymoor's forces hit the southern garrison, she announced without preamble. 200 men. They burned the outpost and took 30 prisoners. The room erupted into chaos. That's an act of war, Commander Thane roared. It's retaliation, Lady Vesper said grimly. For the wedding. Varon looked like he might vomit. If we respond with force, every house allied with Greymoor will mobilize. We'll be fighting on 3 fronts within a week. Alaric stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. What are our options? We have 2 full regiments stationed in the capital, Thane said. Another 1,000 scattered across the eastern provinces. If we pull them together, we leave the trade routes undefended, Vesper interrupted. Bandits will swarm the moment they realize we're distracted. Then we negotiate, Varon suggested desperately. Send an envoy to Greymoor. Offer reparations. No. Alaric's voice cut through the debate like a blade. We don't negotiate with someone who attacks our people. Greymoor wants a war? We'll give him one, but on our terms. Rowan had been silent until now, listening, analyzing. But something about the situation felt wrong, off. What about the prisoners? She asked. Everyone turned to look at her. The 30 soldiers Greymoor captured, she continued. What will he do with them? Mira's expression darkened. Ransom them, or execute them publicly to make a point. Or use them as leverage, Rowan said slowly. Her mind was racing, connecting pieces. Greymoor didn't attack the southern garrison because it was strategically important. He attacked it because it's visible, because it sends a message. He wants Alaric to retaliate impulsively. To what end? Vesper asked. To prove that Alaric is exactly what Greymoor's been claiming all along, a reckless king who puts personal feelings above the realm's safety. Rowan looked at Alaric. If you march south with your full force, you're playing into his hands. He'll paint you as the aggressor. Every neutral house will turn against you. Silence settled over the table. Then what do you suggest? Alaric asked quietly. Rowan's pulse hammered. She was a wedding planner, not a military strategist, but she'd spent 3 weeks studying the political landscape of the borderlands, mapping alliances and grudges and pressure points. We don't march, she said. We negotiate. But not with Greymoor, with his allies. The houses supporting him aren't unified. Some genuinely believe you're a threat. Others are just opportunists waiting to see which side wins. If we can fracture that coalition before Greymoor consolidates his power, we turn his war into a political disaster, Vesper finished, her eyes gleaming. Isolate him instead of fighting him. It's risky, Thane said. If it fails, we're in the exact same position we are now, Rowan countered. Except we haven't spent lives and resources on a battle we're not ready for. Alaric studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the council. Lady Vesper, I need a list of every house currently allied with Greymore and their specific grievances against the crown. Commander Thane, reinforce the capital's defenses, but hold the eastern regiments in position. Mira, I want intelligence on Greymore's movements, where his forces are concentrated, what his supply lines look like. And Veyron, draft letters to the neutral houses, Veyron said, already reaching for parchment. Show them we're the stable option. Exactly. Alaric's gaze swept the room. We're not starting a war. We're preventing one. The council dispersed quickly, each member racing to execute their assigned tasks. When the chamber finally emptied, Alaric turned to Rowan. That was either brilliant or catastrophic, he said. Ask me in a week. He pulled her into a fierce embrace. You just out-strategized my entire war council. I just delayed a war. That's not the same as winning it. It's a start. But as they left the council chamber, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just set something irreversible in motion. The next week became a chess match played across the borderlands. Lady Vesper reached out to House Merrick, whose lands produced most of the realm's grain. She offered favorable trade agreements and clemency for past border disputes. Merrick withdrew their support from Greymore within 3 days. Commander Thane sent quiet envoys to the mercenary companies Greymore had been courting, offering better pay and safer contracts. 2 of the 3 companies switched sides, and Rowan, working with Veyron, crafted letters to every noble who'd attended the wedding, thanking them for their presence, subtly reminding them of the realm's stability under Alaric's rule, and hinting at opportunities for those who stood with the crown. It was exhausting, delicate work. Every word mattered. Every alliance was fragile. But slowly, impossibly, it began to work. Greymore's coalition started to fracture. Then, on the 8th day, everything changed. Rowan was in the library reviewing supply manifests when a messenger arrived, wild-eyed and gasping for breath. Your Majesty, he stammered, message from the southern border, urgent. Rowan broke the seal and read the contents. Her blood went cold. She ran. She found Alaric in the war room with Mira and Thane studying maps of the southern provinces. He looked up when she burst in. Rowan, what? Greymore took a village, she said, her voice shaking. Thornmere, 200 civilians. He's holding them hostage. The room went silent. Mira swore viciously. When? Last night. He's demanding that Alaric annul the marriage and abdicate in favor of a neutral council. Rowan's hands clenched around the letter. If Alaric doesn't comply within 3 days, Greymore will execute 10 civilians for every day of delay. Thane's face went ashen. That's 200 innocent lives. It's leverage, Mira spat. He knows Alaric won't sacrifice civilians. He's forcing a choice. Alaric stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Show me the map. They gathered around the table. Thornmere was a small farming village nestled in a valley near the southern border, isolated, defensible, and strategically worthless. It's a trap, Thane said. If we send forces to rescue the hostages, we leave the capital vulnerable, and Thornmere's terrain favors defenders. We'd lose half our men trying to take it. Then we negotiate, Veyron said, his voice desperate. Give Greymore something. Buy time. There's nothing to negotiate, Mira interrupted. This isn't about terms. This is about breaking Alaric publicly, making him choose between his crown and innocent lives. Alaric's hands pressed flat against the table. How many soldiers does Greymore have in Thornmere? Best estimate? 50 to 70, Thane said, but they're dug in, and the village is surrounded by open fields, no cover for an approach. What about the prisoners from the garrison attack? Rowan asked. The 30 soldiers. Where are they? Mira consulted a report. Still held in Greymore's main camp, 20 miles north of Thornmere. Rowan's mind raced. Pieces clicked together. Hostages in 2 locations. Greymore's forces split. The tight 3-day deadline. He's overextended, she said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. Greymore's gambling that will focus on Thornmere because the stakes are civilian lives. But he's got forces in 2 locations, supply lines stretched across 50 miles of hostile territory, and a coalition that's already starting to fracture. He's not consolidating power. He's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous, Thane warned. They're also predictable. Rowan pointed to the map. What if we don't go after Thornmere directly? What if we cut his supply lines here? She traced a route. Force him to pull soldiers from the village to protect his logistics, then hit the garrison camp and free those prisoners. If we can rescue 30 trained soldiers and disrupt his supplies simultaneously, he'll have to abandon Thornmere or risk losing everything, Vesper finished, having just entered the room. And if he abandons the village, the civilian hostages become a liability instead of leverage. It's risky, Mira said, but there was respect in her voice. We'd need perfect timing, and if anything goes wrong, 200 people die, Alaric said quietly. I know. The room fell silent. Rowan watched emotions flicker across Alaric's face. Anger, fear, determination. This was the weight of the crown. The impossible choices. Finally, he looked up. We execute the plan, but I lead the garrison raid personally. Absolutely not, Mira said immediately. You're the king. If you fall, then Rowan becomes regent, and the realm continues. Alaric's voice was steel. I won't ask soldiers to risk their lives while I sit safe in the capital. This is my decision, my responsibility. And mine, Rowan said. Everyone turned to stare at her. If you're leading the garrison raid, I'm coming with you. Rowan, no. You said yourself I'm part of this now. Your choices are my choices. Your risks are my risks. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not staying behind while you ride into danger. You're not a soldier. Neither were you before you became king. You learned. So will I. Mira actually laughed. I'm starting to understand why you married her. Alaric looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew that expression on Rowan's face, the same stubborn determination that had carried her through 3 weeks of impossible wedding planning. Fine, he said finally, but you stay behind the front line, and if things go wrong, I know, I run. Rowan managed a weak smile. I'm not entirely reckless, just mostly reckless, Mira muttered. All right, we've got 48 hours to plan this raid and pray it works. Let's move. The next 2 days were controlled chaos. Mira assembled a strike force of 30 elite soldiers, enough to hit hard and fast, small enough to move undetected. Thane organized diversionary movements to make Greymore think the main force was massing near the capital. Vesper sent messages to sympathetic houses, warning them to be ready for potential fallout, and Rowan prepared herself for something she'd never imagined doing, riding into combat. Mira pulled her aside the night before they were set to depart. You sure about this? The captain asked bluntly. No, but I'm going anyway. Fair enough. Mira handed her a short blade in a leather sheath. Keep this on you. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Rowan took the blade, feeling its unfamiliar weight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just stay close to me during the raid. Do exactly what I say, when I say it. And if I tell you to run, I run. I know. Mira studied her for a moment. You love him. Really love him. It wasn't a question. Yes, Rowan said simply. Then keep him alive. Because if Alaric falls tomorrow, this whole realm falls with him. They rode out at dawn. 30 soldiers, moving fast through the borderlands terrain. Alaric had traded his royal regalia for plain armor, indistinguishable from any other fighter. Rowan wore borrowed riding gear and kept Mira's blade strapped to her belt. The landscape they crossed was harsh and beautiful. Rolling hills covered in scrub grass, rocky outcroppings that could hide bandits or worse, scattered forests of twisted pines. This was frontier country, where survival depended on strength and vigilance. They rode for 8 hours, stopping only to rest the horses. As the sun began to set, Mira called a halt. Greymoor's camp is 2 miles ahead, she said quietly. We wait for full dark, then move in. The waiting was agony. Rowan sat beside Alaric, both of them silent. Around them, soldiers checked weapons, whispered prayers to old frontier gods, prepared themselves for violence. I need you to promise me something, Alaric said finally. Don't. If this goes wrong, it won't. Rowan. He turned to face her, his expression raw. If I fall, you get out. You don't stay and fight. You don't try to be a hero. You survive. Promise me. She wanted to argue, to tell him she'd fight beside him no matter what, but she saw the fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. I promise, she whispered. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like it might be the last time. When they broke apart, Mira was signaling. It was time. They moved through the darkness like ghosts. The garrison camp appeared as a cluster of tents around a central command structure. Sentries patrolled the perimeter, but they were lazy, confident. Graymore clearly didn't expect an attack here. That was about to change. Mira's hand signals were sharp and precise. The strike force split into 3 groups, one to eliminate the sentries, one to free the prisoners, one to secure the command tent. Alaric led the prisoner rescue team. Rowan stayed with Mira, as promised. The first sentry died without a sound, Mira's blade finding his throat before he could raise an alarm. The second fell to a precisely thrown knife. The third managed half a shout before another soldier silenced him. Then they were inside the camp. Chaos erupted. Graymore's soldiers scrambled from their tents, grabbing weapons, shouting orders. Steel clashed against steel. Men screamed. The night filled with violence. Rowan pressed herself against the command tent, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was nothing like the calculated precision of wedding planning. This was raw, brutal survival. She heard Alaric's voice cutting through the chaos. Here! The prisoners are here! Then another voice, cold, cultured, furious. Well, the newlywed king himself. Rowan's blood froze. She knew that voice, Lord Graymore. She moved without thinking, rounding the tent to find Graymore standing 20 feet from Alaric, flanked by 6 armed guards. Between them, the freed prisoners, 30 haggard soldiers still chained. Let them go, Alaric said, his sword drawn. Graymore smiled. I don't think so. In fact, I think you've just solved a problem for me. He gestured, and his guards raised crossbows. I was wondering how to lure you out of your fortress. Turns out, I didn't need to. You came to me. You kill me, you start a war you can't win. Oh, I'm not going to kill you. That would be too merciful. Graymore's eyes glittered with malice. I'm going to break you, starting with everyone you care about. His gaze shifted, directly to Rowan. She realized her mistake a heartbeat too late. She'd stepped into the open, made herself visible. Graymore's smile widened. And there's the wedding planner. How convenient. Run! Alaric roared. But Graymore's guards were already moving. Rowan drew Mira's blade and slashed wildly as a guard grabbed for her. The blade connected. She felt resistance, heard a scream. Then hands seized her from behind, wrenching the weapon away. She fought, kicked, bit, clawed. It wasn't enough. They dragged her toward Graymore, who watched with cold satisfaction. Let her go! Alaric moved forward, but crossbows trained on him immediately. One more step and you die, Graymore said pleasantly. Then I execute every prisoner here. Then I ride to Thornmere and slaughter every civilian. Do you really want that much blood on your hands? Alaric froze, his face twisted in anguish. Graymore turned to Rowan. You've caused me considerable trouble, Miss Hale. Or should I say, Your Majesty? He grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Did you really think you could outmaneuver me? A commoner playing at politics? Rowan spat in his face. His fist connected with her jaw and the world exploded in pain. She tasted blood. Stop! Alaric's voice cracked. Please, I'll give you whatever you want. Just let her go. What I want, Graymore said softly, is for you to understand what it feels like to lose everything. He drew a dagger and pressed it to Rowan's throat. So here's my offer. Abdicate, publicly. Announce that your marriage was a mistake and that you're dissolving the crown in favor of a neutral council. Do that, and I'll let your little planner live. The blade bit into Rowan's skin. She felt warm blood trickle down her neck. Don't, she gasped. Alaric, don't. Or, Graymore continued, you refuse, and I cut her throat right here. Then I kill the prisoners. Then Thornmere burns. Your choice, Your Majesty. Silence crashed across the camp. Every soldier, every prisoner, every heartbeat hung suspended. Alaric looked at Rowan, and she saw everything in his eyes, love, rage, desperation, defeat. She shook her head, tried to tell him with her eyes, don't give up the realm, not for me. But she knew what he would choose. He would choose her. He would give up everything. All right, Alaric said, his voice breaking. All right, you win. I'll abdicate. Graymore's smile was triumphant. And then the world detonated. Fire erupted from the command tent. Mira's strike team, setting charges. Guards scattered, screaming. The crossbows swung away from Alaric for just a heartbeat. It was enough. Alaric moved like lightning, his blade finding the nearest guard. Mira appeared from the smoke, her sword carving through two more. The freed prisoners grabbed dropped weapons and surged forward with desperate fury. In the chaos, Greymoor's grip on Rowan loosened. She drove her elbow back into his ribs with everything she had. He grunted, stumbled. She ran. Mira caught her, pulled her toward the horses. Move! Move! Behind them, Alaric fought like a man possessed, cutting through Greymoor's guards with surgical precision. The camp collapsed into complete chaos. Fire, steel, screams. They reached the horses. Mira threw Rowan onto one, vaulted onto another. "Where's Alaric?" Rowan screamed. Then she saw him, racing toward them with Greymoor right behind, murder in the Lord's eyes. Alaric reached his horse, swung up, and Greymoor's thrown dagger caught him in the shoulder. Alaric gasped, nearly fell. Rowan's scream tore from her throat, but Mira was already there, grabbing Alaric's reins, spurring both horses into a gallop. The strike force scattered in all directions. The plan was to split up, regroup at a designated point 5 miles north. They rode hard through the darkness, Greymoor's enraged shouts fading behind them. Blood soaked through Alaric's armor. And as they raced through the hostile borderlands with enemies behind and uncertain allies ahead, Rowan realized something with crystal clarity. They'd struck a blow against Greymoor, but they'd also made this personal. And in the borderlands, personal wars ended only one way, with blood. They rode for 3 hours before Mira finally signaled a halt in a dense pine forest. The strike force regrouped in scattered pairs. 23 soldiers made it out. 7 hadn't. Alaric slid from his horse and immediately collapsed. Rowan was beside him in an instant, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound. The dagger was still embedded in his shoulder, just below the collarbone. Blood had soaked through his armor, dark and steady. "Don't pull it out," Mira ordered, kneeling beside them. "Not until we can cauterize the wound. If you pull it now, he could bleed out in minutes." "Then what do we do?" Rowan's voice cracked. "We get him back to Ironhaven. Fast." Mira looked around at the exhausted soldiers. "We're still 15 miles from the capital. Greymoor's forces will be hunting us. We need to move. He can't ride like this. He doesn't have a choice." Mira's expression was grim. "None of us do." They fashioned a makeshift sling to stabilize Alaric's arm and bound the wound as best they could. He was conscious, but barely. His skin had gone pale, his breathing shallow. "I'm all right," he rasped when Rowan helped him back onto his horse. "Just keep moving." "You're not all right," Rowan said fiercely, "but we're getting you home." They rode. The journey back to Ironhaven became a nightmare of endurance. They moved through darkness, following trails only Mira and the most experienced scouts could navigate. Every sound made Rowan's heart jump. Was that Greymoor's men? Bandits? Worse? Alaric grew weaker with each mile. Twice he nearly fell from his horse. Twice Rowan caught him, terror clawing at her throat. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, just stay with me." "Not going anywhere," he managed. "Too stubborn. You learned from the best." His smile was weak but real. Dawn was breaking when they finally saw Ironhaven's walls rising in the distance. The strike force urged their exhausted horses into a final gallop, racing toward the gates. Guards saw them coming and shouted alerts. The gates swung open. They thundered through into the courtyard where healers were already assembling, summoned by the advanced scouts. Alaric was carried to his chambers on a stretcher. Rowan ran beside him, refusing to let go of his hand, even when the healers tried to push her away. "I need space to work," the head healer, a severe woman named Kestra, said firmly. "I'm not leaving." "Your Majesty, I said I'm not leaving." Rowan's voice came out sharper than she intended. Then quieter. "Please, I need to be here." Kestra studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fine, but stay out of the way." The next hour was agony. Kestra and her assistants cut away Alaric's armor and clothing, exposing the wound. The dagger had gone deep, missing the major arteries by inches. When they finally extracted the blade, blood welled up thick and fast. Alaric screamed. Rowan bit down on her knuckles to keep from crying out with him. They cauterized the wound with a heated blade. The smell of burning flesh filled the room. Alaric mercifully lost consciousness halfway through. When it was finally over, Kestra stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He'll live," she said. "Assuming infection doesn't set in. The next 3 days are critical." "What can I do?" Rowan asked. "Stay with him, talk to him, keep him fighting." Kestra packed her instruments. "And pray you got him here in time." Then she left, taking her assistants with her. Rowan sank into a chair beside Alaric's bed, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She took his hand. His skin was too warm, fever already setting in. "You can't leave me," she whispered. "Not after everything. Not now." He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened slightly around hers. And for the moment, it was enough. Rowan didn't leave Alaric's side for the next 36 hours. She dozed in the chair, woke whenever he stirred, bathed his forehead with cool water when the fever spiked. Healers came and went, changing bandages, forcing herbal concoctions down his throat. Sometimes he was lucid enough to speak. Other times he thrashed in delirium, reliving the raid. During one of the lucid periods, he caught her hand. "The prisoners," he rasped. "Did we get them out?" "All 30. They made it back to Ironhaven this morning." Relief flooded his features. "And Thornmere? The civilians?" "Greymore abandoned the village the same night as the raid, just like you predicted." Rowan squeezed his hand. "The hostages are safe, all of them. We did it. You did it. You risked everything." "We risked everything," he corrected weakly. "You were there. You fought. I got captured within 5 minutes. And then you escaped, fought back, survived." His eyes locked onto hers. "You're stronger than you think, Rowan." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Every moment since we left that camp, I've been terrified." "Good. Means you're paying attention." He coughed, winced. "What's the council saying?" "That you're either brilliant or insane, possibly both." "Sounds about right." But his attempt at humor faded quickly, exhaustion pulling him back under. Rowan watched him sleep and tried not to think about how close they'd come to losing everything. On the 3rd day, Alaric's fever broke. Rowan woke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since the raid. "You look terrible," he said. She laughed, half relief, half hysteria. "You're one to talk. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days? He tried to sit up, grimaced. "What did I miss?" "Everything. Nothing. I'll catch you up once you're strong enough to handle it." "Tell me now." Rowan hesitated, then nodded. If their positions were reversed, she'd want to know too. "The raid worked better than we hoped. Rescuing the prisoners and disrupting Greymoor's supply lines forced him to pull back from Thornmere. The civilians are safe, and the freed soldiers are being hailed as heroes across the capital. But," she paused, "Greymoor's furious. He's calling the raid an unprovoked attack. He's using it to rally more houses to his cause." "How many?" 3 more declared for him, but 2 others defected to our side. Net gain, -1. Alaric closed his eyes, processing. "And Duke Varen?" "Silent, which is somehow worse than if he'd chosen a side. He's waiting to see who wins before he commits." Alaric's jaw tightened. Smart, cowardly, but smart. A knock interrupted them. Mira entered without waiting for permission. "You're awake. Thank the old gods." "How bad is it?" Alaric asked. "Depends on your definition of bad." Mira pulled up a chair. "Greymoor's regrouping, but he's overextended. The raid hit his logistics hard. He's got maybe 2 weeks before his forces start going hungry. But he knows it, which makes him desperate. And desperate men do desperate things," Rowan finished. "Exactly." Mira looked between them. "There's something else. We captured one of Greymoor's commanders during the raid. He's been cooperative." "Meaning," Alaric prompted, "meaning he's given us intelligence on Greymoor's plans, and it's worse than we thought." Mira leaned forward. "Greymoor's been in contact with mercenary companies from across the Eastern Territories. He's hiring anyone who'll take his gold, pirates, bandits, exiled knights. He's building an army that doesn't answer to any house or honor code. If he succeeds, he won't just challenge your rule. He'll burn the entire borderlands to ash." The room went silent. "How long do we have?" Alaric asked finally. 3 weeks, maybe 4. That's when his main force will be at full strength." Then we have 3 weeks to end this. Alaric tried to sit up again, managed it this time despite the pain. Assemble the full council. I want everyone— You need to rest, Rowan interrupted. I'll rest when this is over. Alaric, she's right, Mira said, surprising them both. You can't lead from a sickbed. Take 2 more days. Heal. Let us handle the immediate crisis. Then you come back strong enough to actually fight. Alaric looked like he wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in his eyes won out. 2 days, he said finally. Not a moment longer. Mira left to convene the council. Rowan stayed, helping Alaric settle back against the pillows. You should rest too, he said quietly. I will, once I know you're stable. I'm stable, Kestra said so. Kestra said you'll live if infection doesn't set in. That's not the same as stable. Alaric caught her hand. Rowan, when was the last time you slept more than an hour? Or ate a full meal? Or left this room? She didn't answer. You can't take care of me if you collapse from exhaustion, he said gently. Please, get some rest. I'll still be here when you wake up. Promise? I promise. She wanted to stay, to keep watch, to make sure nothing went wrong. But her body was screaming for rest. 2 hours, she said. Then I'm coming back. Fine, 2 hours. She stood, leaned down, and kissed him gently. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. She made it to her own chambers and collapsed onto the bed still fully clothed. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Rowan woke 6 hours later to someone pounding on her door. She stumbled upright, disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the windows. It was afternoon. She'd slept far longer than intended. Your Majesty, Veyron's voice frantic. We need you in the council chamber immediately. She threw on a clean dress and ran. The council chamber was in chaos when she arrived. Veyron, Lady Vesper, Commander Thane, and a dozen other advisors all talked over each other in heated voices. What's happening? Rowan demanded. Everyone turned to look at her. Lady Vesper stepped forward. House Kellis just declared for Greymore, but Baron Kellis wants to negotiate terms first. He sent an envoy requesting a private audience. With who? With you. Rowan blinked. Me? Apparently the Baron was impressed by how you handled Duke Varen at the wedding reception. He wants to discuss terms with the Queen directly. I'm not— Rowan started, then stopped. She was the Queen, whether she felt qualified or not. All right, when? He's waiting in the West Parlor. Now. Rowan's mind raced. Baron Kellis controlled significant territory in the northern provinces. Farmland, trade routes, and a private military force rumored to be 300 strong. If he declared for Greymore, it would tip the balance of power significantly. But if she could convince him otherwise— I'll speak with him, she said, alone. Your Majesty, that's inadvisable, Thane began. Noted. I'm doing it anyway. Rowan turned to Veyron. Have Mira station guards outside the parlor, close enough to respond if needed, far enough to give us privacy. Veyron nodded and hurried off. Rowan took a steadying breath. She'd negotiated with difficult clients before. This was just another negotiation, except the stakes were hundreds of lives instead of seating arrangements. She found Baron Kellis in the West Parlor, standing by the window. He was a stocky man with iron-gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades managing harsh frontier lands. He turned when she entered. Your Majesty? Baron Kellis, thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to meet. He gestured to the chairs. May we sit? They settled across from each other. Rowan folded her hands in her lap and waited. Let him speak first. Show his hand. I'll be direct, Kellis said. I came here to tell you I'm declaring for Greymore, but I wanted to offer you a chance to convince me otherwise. Why? The blunt question seemed to surprise him. Why what? Why give me a chance? You've clearly already decided. So why waste time with this meeting? Kellis studied her. Because I'm not convinced Greymore is the answer. He talks about stability and proper order, but I've watched him burn villages and take hostages. That's not order, that's tyranny. And yet you're prepared to support him. Because I don't see an alternative. King Alaric married a commoner with no political experience, alienated half the realm's power structure, and started a war he may not be able to win. From where I sit, that looks like chaos. Rowan met his gaze steadily. From where I sit, it looks like a man refusing to be controlled by threats and extortion. Graymore tried to use this marriage as leverage. Alaric called his bluff. And when Graymore took hostages, we didn't negotiate. We acted. We freed those prisoners. We saved those civilians. We showed the realm that this crown doesn't bow to bullies. At what cost? 7 soldiers dead, the king wounded, and Graymore more determined than ever. The cost of freedom is always high, but the cost of submission is higher. Rowan leaned forward. You say you're not convinced Graymore is the answer. I'm telling you he's not. He's offering you temporary stability in exchange for permanent servitude. Every house that bends to him becomes a tool he can use and discard when convenient. Is that really what you want for your lands? Your people? Kellis was silent for a long moment. What does Alaric offer that's different? He asked finally. Partnership, not control. Alaric doesn't want vassals who obey out of fear. He wants allies who choose to stand together because it's the right path forward. Pretty words, but words don't feed armies or protect borders. You're right. Action does. Rowan pulled a folded document from her dress pocket. She'd grabbed it from Veyron on the way to the parlor. This is a trade agreement Alaric drafted before Greymore's rebellion. It would have reduced tariffs on northern grain exports by 30% and provided royal subsidies for border fortifications. It was ready to be presented to the council the week of the wedding. She handed it to Kellis. He read it, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. This is generous. It's fair. Alaric understands that strong provinces make a strong realm. He's not interested in hoarding power. He's interested in distributing it to people who will use it responsibly. And you? What's your role in all this? I make sure things get done. I see the patterns others miss. I turn chaos into order. Rowan's voice steadied. I spent 3 weeks planning a wedding that was supposed to unite this realm. When that failed, I helped plan a raid that saved 200 lives. Now I'm here, asking you to choose the future over the past. Choose partnership over servitude. Choose you, Kellis interrupted. You're asking me to choose you. Rowan paused, then nodded. Yes, I am. Kellis set the document down. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A frightened girl in over her head, someone Graymore could dismiss as a political accident. He smiled slightly. But you're not that, are you? I'm a wedding planner who married a king because I refused to let fear dictate my choices. I'm learning as I go, making mistakes. But I'm here, and I'm fighting, and I'm not backing down. Rowan stood. So yes, Baron Kellis, I'm asking you to choose me. Choose Alaric. Choose a realm built on strength and partnership instead of threats and submission. The choice is yours. She walked to the door, hand on the handle. Your Majesty, Kellis called. She turned. I'll stay neutral, he said, for now. But if Alaric proves himself, if he shows me this partnership you're promising is real, then I'll declare for the crown. You have my word. It wasn't a full victory, but it was enough. Thank you, Baron, Rowan said. That's all we're asking, a chance to prove ourselves. She left the parlor and nearly collapsed against the wall outside. Mira appeared beside her. How'd it go? He's staying neutral. That's it? That's everything. One less house for Graymore. One more that might eventually support us. Rowan managed a shaky laugh. I just negotiated my first political alliance. And you didn't even throw up. I'm impressed. Give me 5 minutes. I might still. But despite the exhaustion and lingering fear, Rowan felt something else. Pride. She'd faced down a baron and convinced him to hold back his support from Graymore. She'd done that. The wedding planner from the eastern provinces with no title and no training. Maybe she could do this after all. The next 2 weeks became a careful dance of diplomacy and preparation. Rowan threw herself into political negotiations with the same intensity she'd once applied to wedding planning. She met with neutral houses, offering trade agreements and compromises. She coordinated with Lady Vesper on supply logistics. She worked with Veyron to draft messages that painted Alaric's rule as stable and Greymore's rebellion as chaos. And slowly, impossibly, it started to work. 3 more houses declared neutral instead of supporting Greymore. 2 minor lords switched their allegiance to Alaric outright. The coalition Greymore had been building began to crack at the edges. But it wasn't enough. Greymore still commanded significant forces, and his mercenary army was growing. Alaric recovered faster than the healers predicted. Within a week, he was back on his feet, still favoring his injured shoulder but functional. He resumed command of the war effort with grim determination. "We can't just defend," he said during one strategy session. "Greymore's building an army. Eventually, he'll have the numbers to overwhelm us. We need to take the fight to him before he's ready." "That's suicide," Thane argued. "We're outnumbered even now. Once his mercenaries arrive, which is why we strike before they arrive." Alaric pointed to the map. Greymore's main encampment is here in the southern valley. His supply lines run through 3 key passes. If we can cut those passes simultaneously, we starve his army before the mercenaries even reach him. "That would require splitting our forces 3 ways, Vesper said. "It's risky." "Everything is risky, but doing nothing guarantees defeat." Alaric looked around the table. "I need 3 commanders willing to lead those strikes. Volunteers only." Mira raised her hand immediately. "I'll take the Western Pass." Thane followed. "Eastern Pass is mine." The 3rd pass, the southern route, closest to Greymore's main force, remained unclaimed. "I'll lead the southern strike," Rowan said. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Alaric said immediately. "Why not? I proved I can handle myself during the garrison raid." "You got captured during the garrison raid, and escaped, and survived, and learned." Rowan met his gaze steadily. "I'm not the same person I was 3 weeks ago. I can do this. It's too dangerous. Everything we're doing is dangerous. The question is whether I'm capable, not whether it's safe." Alaric looked like he wanted to argue further, but he knew that expression on her face. "Mira goes with you," he said finally, "and you take double the usual guard complement, non-negotiable. Deal." The War Council spent the next 3 days planning the coordinated strikes. Each team would move simultaneously, hitting all 3 passes within a 4-hour window. The goal was disruption, not annihilation. Cut the supply lines, then retreat before Greymore could respond with overwhelming force. On the morning of the strike, Rowan stood in the courtyard reviewing her team, 40 soldiers, all veterans. Mira beside her, checking weapons with practiced efficiency. Alaric approached, his expression tight with worry. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Always." "I mean it, Rowan. If things go wrong—" "I run. I know. We've been over this." She took his hand. "You be careful too. If Greymore realizes what we're doing and counter-strikes at the capital, I'll handle it. I know you will." They stood there for a moment, just holding hands. Then Alaric pulled her close and kissed her, deep, fierce, desperate. "Come back to me," he whispered against her lips. "Always." Then she was mounting her horse, and the strike team was moving out, and there was no more time for words or worry, only action. The southern pass was a narrow gorge carved through granite cliffs. Greymore's supply caravans traveled through it daily, bringing food, weapons, and equipment to his growing army. Rowan's team positioned themselves on the high ground, hidden among the rocks. They waited. 2 hours later, the first caravan appeared. 8 wagons, 20 guards. Mira gave the signal. Rocks rained down from above, blocking the pass ahead and behind. The guards shouted, scrambling for weapons. Rowan's soldiers descended with brutal efficiency. The fight was short and vicious. Rowan stayed back as instructed, watching from the high ground. But when she saw one of her soldiers go down with an arrow through his leg, she moved without thinking. She half slid, half climbed down to where the wounded soldier lay. An enemy guard saw her and charged. She drew her blade, Mira's blade, and met him. Their weapons clashed. The guard was stronger, more experienced. He drove her back against the cliff wall, his sword seeking her throat. Rowan ducked, slashed low. Her blade caught his leg. He stumbled. She drove forward with everything she had, and the blade found his chest. He fell. Rowan stood there, gasping, her hands shaking. She'd just killed a man. "Your Majesty!" One of her soldiers, a young woman named Sarah, appeared beside her. "You all right?" "Fine. I'm fine." Rowan forced herself to focus. "Help me with the wounded. We need to move." They gathered their injured, set fire to the supply wagons, and retreated into the hills. The mission was a success. All three strikes hit within the planned window. Greymore's supply lines were severed simultaneously. His army would start running short on food and equipment within days. But the cost was steep. Rowan's team lost 3 soldiers. Thane's lost 5. Mira's lost 4. 12 more names added to the growing list of the dead. That night, back in Ironhaven, Rowan couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the guard's face. The moment her blade had found his chest, the light leaving his eyes, she'd killed someone. And the worst part was, she'd do it again if she had to. Alaric found her on their private balcony, staring at the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him. The man I killed." Alaric moved beside her, close but not touching. "It doesn't get easier, even when it's necessary, even when it's self-defense. Taking a life changes you. How do you live with it? You remember why you did it. You remember who you were protecting, and you carry the weight because someone has to." He finally took her hand. "But you don't carry it alone." Rowan leaned against him, letting his warmth steady her. "The strikes worked," she said finally. "Greymore's supply lines are cut. What happens now?" "Now we press the advantage. Force him to negotiate or retreat before his mercenaries arrive. And if he doesn't, then we fight, and we win, because the alternative isn't acceptable." They stood together in the darkness, 2 people who'd chosen the hardest path possible and refused to turn back. Somewhere in the borderlands, Greymore's army was starving, and the balance of power was finally beginning to shift. 3 days later, a messenger arrived at Ironhaven bearing Greymore's seal. The council convened immediately. Veyron broke the seal and read the contents, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief. "It's a request for parley," he announced. "Greymore wants to negotiate terms. He's proposing a meeting at neutral ground, the old fortress at Greystone Ridge. 5 representatives from each side. No armies." "It's a trap," Mira said immediately. "Probably," Alaric agreed. "But it's also an opportunity. If we can negotiate an end to this without more bloodshed." "You can't seriously be considering this," Thane interrupted. "Greymore tried to kill you, twice. Which is why we take precautions. Heavy guard presence on the perimeter, multiple escape routes, and I want our best fighters in that room." Alaric looked around the table. "Who's with me?" Mira, Thane, and Vesper all volunteered immediately. Rowan raised her hand. "I'm coming too." "Rowan, you need someone there who understands political nuance, someone who can read the room and catch what isn't being said." She met his gaze. "You need me there. You know you do." Alaric looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. "Fine. But Mira doesn't leave your side. I can live with that." Greystone Ridge was exactly what its name suggested, a crumbling fortress perched on a granite outcrop, abandoned decades ago but still defensible. The perfect place for a parley that both sides expected to go wrong. Alaric's contingent arrived first, positioning soldiers around the perimeter. Then Greymore's forces appeared. 100 men, well-armed, positioned in clear sight. The message was obvious. I'm not here to negotiate from weakness. The parley took place in what had once been the fortress's great hall. A single table, 10 chairs, no other furniture. Greymore entered with 4 advisors, including Duke Varen. Rowan's stomach clenched. Varen had finally chosen a side. The 2 groups sat across from each other, separated by 3 feet of scarred wood. "Well," Greymore said pleasantly, "here we are." "Here we are," Alaric agreed. "You requested this meeting. What are your terms?" "Simple. You abdicate. Your marriage is annulled. The crown passes to a neutral council I'll help establish. And in exchange, I end my campaign and withdraw my forces." "No." Greymore's smile didn't falter. "No. You haven't even considered—" "There's nothing to consider. I don't negotiate with extortionists." "Then we're at an impasse." Greymore leaned back. "A shame. I was hoping we could avoid more bloodshed." "Were you?" Rowan spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the tension. "Because from where I sit, you've done everything possible to ensure bloodshed. You took hostages. You hired mercenaries. You burned villages. If you wanted peace, You had a strange way of pursuing it. Greymore's gaze shifted to her. Ah, the wedding planner who became queen. Tell me, Your Majesty, do you feel qualified for this role, or do you lie awake at night wondering how long before you're exposed as a fraud? Every night, Rowan said calmly. But then I remember that qualification isn't about birthright or titles. It's about capability, and I've proven mine by outmaneuvering you at every turn. Farron snorted. Outmaneuvering? You've lost half the realm's support. Have we? Rowan pulled out a folded document. These are the most recent reports on house alliances. Since the wedding, 13 houses have declared neutral instead of supporting Greymore. 4 have switched their allegiance to Alaric outright. And your mercenary recruitment? It's stalled because we've been quietly offering better contracts to anyone willing to reconsider. She slid the document across the table. Greymore read it, his expression darkening. You're losing, Lord Greymore, Rowan continued. Your supply lines are cut. Your coalition is fracturing, and the mercenaries you're counting on? Half of them won't arrive because they've taken our gold instead. So maybe instead of demanding abdication, you should be negotiating your own terms of surrender. The room went silent. Greymore's mask finally cracked, rage flooding his features. You dare! I dare, Rowan said, because I'm done being afraid of you. Greymore stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. This parley is over. Sit down, Alaric said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Greymore hesitated. Sit down. Slowly, Greymore sat. Alaric leaned forward. Here are my terms. You disband your forces. You return to your lands. You cease all hostile action against the crown. In exchange, I grant you clemency for the rebellion. No executions, no seized property. You keep your title and your holdings, but you stay out of royal politics for the next 10 years. That's humiliation. That's mercy. More than you've shown anyone else. Alaric's eyes were cold as winter steel. Take it, or we end this the hard way. Greymore looked around the table, at his advisors, at Varen, searching for support. He found none. Finally, he spoke. I need time to consider. You have until sunset tomorrow. After that, the offer expires. The parley ended. Both groups left the fortress without further conflict, but the tension was electric. On the ride back to Ironhaven, Mira sidled her horse close to Rowan's. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest, the captain said. Can it be both? Probably, Mira grinned. But you broke him. Did you see his face when you laid out those alliance numbers? He realized he'd already lost. We haven't won yet. No, but for the first time, it feels possible. That night, Rowan stood in the council chamber surrounded by maps and reports, waiting for Greymore's response. Alaric found her there, still awake at midnight. You should rest, he said. So should you. Stalemate. She smiled despite her exhaustion. Do you think he'll accept? Yes. Because the alternative is total defeat, and Greymore's too smart to choose destruction over survival. And if I'm wrong? If he refuses? Then we fight, and we win. Alaric moved beside her, looking down at the maps. But I don't think you're wrong. You saw something in that parley, something the rest of us missed. What did I see? That Greymore was already beaten. He just hadn't admitted it yet. And you forced him to face that truth. Alaric turned to her. You've changed since we met, Rowan. Grown stronger, sharper, more confident. I had to. The Borderlands don't reward hesitation. No, but they reward courage, and you have that in abundance. The next day at sunset, a messenger arrived. Greymore's response was brief. He accepted the terms. The rebellion was over. The council chamber erupted in cheers. Soldiers embraced. Even Veyron managed a smile. Rowan stood in the center of it all, watching the celebration, trying to process what they'd accomplished. They'd done it. Against every odd, every expectation, every voice that said they'd fail, they'd won. Alaric pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. We did it, he whispered. We actually did it. We did, Rowan agreed, laughing through sudden tears. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Ironhaven, she let herself believe it might actually be true. The celebration lasted until dawn. Rowan moved through the great hall in a daze, accepting congratulations from nobles who weeks ago had whispered about her unsuitability. Wine flowed freely. Musicians played victory songs. Soldiers who'd fought in the raids were lifted onto shoulders and praised as heroes. But beneath the jubilation, Rowan felt something else stirring. Unfinished business. Greymore had accepted the terms, yes, but acceptance wasn't the same as surrender. And the realm was still fractured, still wounded, still watching to see if this fragile peace would hold or shatter at the first challenge. Near midnight, she slipped away to the quiet of the royal library. She needed space to think, to process, to understand what came next. She found Alaric already there, standing by the window that overlooked the city. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without turning. "Too much energy, too many thoughts." She moved beside him. "Do you think it's really over?" "The fighting is, but building something that lasts? That's the harder work." "How do we do it? How do we turn a forced peace into something real?" Alaric was silent for a moment. Then he turned to face her. "We prove we meant what we said, about partnership, about strength without tyranny. We show the realm that what we've built together isn't just survival, it's something worth choosing. That could take years. Then we have years." He took her hand. "We didn't come this far to give up now." The formal treaty signing took place 1 week later in the Cathedral of the First Flame, the same place where Rowan and Alaric had married in defiance of tradition. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone. 200 nobles filled the pews again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Tense, yes. Uncertain. But not hostile. The realm was watching with something closer to cautious hope than barely concealed rage. Greymore arrived with a small escort, looking diminished without his army behind him. He'd aged in the weeks since the rebellion. New lines carved around his eyes, his shoulders carrying a weight they hadn't before. He and Alaric met at the altar, the treaty spread between them. "This doesn't mean I agree with your choices," Greymore said quietly, for Alaric's ears only. "Or that I think you're fit to rule." "I know," Alaric replied, "but it means you're willing to let the realm decide that, instead of forcing it with violence. That's enough." They signed simultaneously. The cathedral erupted in applause, some genuine, some perfunctory, all necessary. The rebellion was officially over, but as Rowan watched from the front pew, she noticed something. Several nobles who'd remained neutral during the conflict were watching her instead of Greymore or Alaric, assessing, calculating, deciding. She'd become a factor in the realm's politics whether she wanted to or not. The reception afterward was smaller, more controlled than the wedding celebration had been. Carefully selected guests, diplomatic conversations, the kind of careful political theater that Rowan had once orchestrated for others. Now she was at its center. Duke Varen approached her near the wine table. He looked uncomfortable. "Your Majesty," he said stiffly. "I wanted to apologize." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "For which part? The veiled insults at my wedding reception, or standing with Greymore during the rebellion?" "Both." He had the decency to look ashamed. "I misjudged you, and I paid for it by choosing the wrong side." "You chose the side you thought would win. That's politics." "It's cowardice," Varen met her gaze. "You were right about the border raids. I authorized them because I thought Alaric was too distracted by his marriage to notice. I underestimated both of you." "Yes, you did. I'd like the opportunity to make amends. My house controls significant mining operations in the northern ranges, operations the Crown could benefit from." Rowan studied him. This was a test. He was offering resources in exchange for forgiveness. The old way, transactional, mercenary, built on mutual advantage rather than trust. She could accept, secure valuable resources for the Crown, or she could demand something different. "I don't want your mines," she said finally. "I want your word that when the next crisis comes, and it will, you'll stand with the Crown based on principle, not profit. That you'll make decisions based on what's right for the realm, not what's advantageous for your house." Varen blinked. "That's not how things work in the borderlands. It's how they're going to work now. We're building something different here, something better. And if you want to be part of it, you need to choose differently too." For a long moment, Varen just stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. "You have my word, Your Majesty." "Good. Then we'll talk about those mining operations later, on terms that benefit both the Crown and your people. Varen bowed and departed, looking oddly relieved. Mira appeared at Rowan's elbow. Did you just turn down a duke's bribe? I turned down a transactional relationship in favor of an actual alliance. Same thing in the borderlands. Not anymore. Mira grinned. You're going to reshape this entire realm, aren't you? One conversation at a time. But the real challenge came 3 days later. Rowan was reviewing trade proposals in her office when Veyron knocked, his expression grave. Your Majesty, there's a situation in the eastern provinces. A village called Millbrook is refusing to pay their taxes to the crown. They're claiming the local magistrate is corrupt and demanding a direct audience with King Alaric. Rowan set down her papers. How large is Millbrook? Maybe 300 people. Farmers, mostly. Not significant politically, but if we ignore them, it sends a message that the crown doesn't care about small communities. Rowan stood. Where's Alaric? Meeting with Commander Thane about garrison restructuring. Tell him I'm handling this. Veyron's eyes widened. Your Majesty, perhaps you should wait for the king. The king is busy, and this is exactly the kind of situation I'm qualified to handle. Rowan pulled on her riding cloak. Assemble a small escort, nothing that looks like a military force, just enough to travel safely. You're going to Millbrook yourself? Yes. If these people want to be heard, I'll hear them. 2 hours later, Rowan rode out of Ironhaven with a 6-person escort, including Mira, who'd insisted on coming despite Rowan's protests. You're not riding into potentially hostile territory without me, the captain had said flatly. Non-negotiable. They reached Millbrook by evening, a cluster of farmhouses and fields nestled in a river valley. Simple, hardworking, isolated. The kind of place that powerful people usually ignored. The village elder, a weathered woman named Mora, met them at the edge of town. She looked surprised to see Rowan instead of Alaric. Your Majesty, Mora said carefully, we requested an audience with the king. The king is managing critical post-war reconstruction. I'm managing everything else, which includes hearing grievances from villages that feel unheard. Rowan dismounted. Tell me about your magistrate. Mora's surprise shifted to cautious respect. His name is Corvin. He was appointed 5 years ago by the previous administration. Since then, he's tripled our tax burden, seized lands from families who couldn't pay, and kept most of the revenue for himself instead of sending it to the crown. Do you have evidence? We have account books, witness testimonies, 3 families who lost their farms. Mora gestured toward the village square. We've been reporting this to the regional governor for 2 years. Nothing's changed. Show me everything. They spent 3 hours reviewing documents in Mora's home. The evidence was damning, clear discrepancies between what Millbrook paid and what reached the royal treasury. Corvin had been skimming at least 60%. Where's Corvin now? Rowan asked. His estate, 3 miles north. Take me there. Mora looked alarmed. Your Majesty, he has private guards. If you confront him directly, then he has a chance to defend himself, which is more courtesy than he's shown your people. Rowan stood. I'm not here to ignore this problem. I'm here to solve it. They rode to Corvin's estate as the sun set, a sprawling property far too grand for a rural magistrate's salary. The wealth disparity was obvious and obscene. Corvin himself was a portly man with soft hands and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He greeted Rowan with exaggerated courtesy that barely masked his contempt. Your Majesty, what an unexpected honor. Please, come in. I'll stand, thank you. Rowan remained mounted, looking down at him. I'm here about the tax discrepancies in Millbrook. Corvin's smile faltered. I'm not sure what you mean. You've been embezzling crown funds for at least 3 years. You've seized property illegally, and you've ignored every complaint filed against you because you assumed no one important enough would care. Rowan's voice was cold, precise. You were wrong. These are baseless accusations from disgruntled peasants. These are documented crimes. She nodded to Mira, who produced the account books. Every transaction, every seizure, every lie. It's all here. Corvin's face went pale, then red. You can't prove... I can, and I will, in front of a royal tribunal. Rowan leaned forward slightly in her saddle. You have two choices. Resign your position immediately, return the seized properties, and repay the embezzled funds, or face trial for corruption and theft from the crown, which carries a sentence of 20 years in the frontier prisons. Your choice. The color drained from Corvin's face entirely. I'll resign, he stammered. Please, I have a family. So do the people whose farms you stole. Remember that when you're deciding how to spend the rest of your life. Rowan turned her horse. You have until tomorrow to draft your resignation and begin restitution. If you're not gone by week's end, I'll send soldiers to ensure compliance. She rode away without waiting for his response. Behind her, Mira was grinning. That, the captain said, was ice cold. That was justice. When they returned to Millbrook, word had already spread. The entire village gathered in the square, watching with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Rowan addressed them from horseback. Magistrate Corvin will resign. Your lands will be returned, and I'm appointing an independent auditor to review the regional tax system and ensure this never happens again. She paused. I know many of you doubted whether the crown cared about villages like yours, whether we'd listen, whether we'd act. I'm here to tell you that we do, we will, and we did. Your voices matter, your lives matter, and as long as I'm queen, you will be heard. The silence that followed felt sacred. Then Mora stepped forward and knelt. Thank you, Your Majesty. Others followed, not in subservience, but in genuine gratitude. Rowan's throat tightened. This was what ruling could be. Not just grand ceremonies and political alliances, but actual people's lives made better by someone with power choosing to use it well. They rode back to Ironhaven under stars, Rowan still processing what had happened. You know what you just did? Mira said quietly. Fixed a corrupt magistrate problem? You showed the realm that the crown isn't just for nobles anymore, that a farming village matters as much as a duke's estate. Mira's voice carried genuine respect. You're building something new here, Rowan. Something that might actually last. When they reached Ironhaven, Alaric was waiting in the courtyard, his expression tight with concern that melted into relief when he saw her. I heard what you did, he said. I handled a local dispute. You rode into potentially hostile territory, confronted a corrupt official, and solved a problem the regional government had been ignoring for years. He pulled her into an embrace. You did exactly what I would have done. Better, probably. I'm still learning. We both are, but you're learning fast. Over the next 3 months, Rowan's role as queen evolved from ceremonial to essential. She established a network of rotating audiences where citizens from any province could petition the crown directly. She worked with Lady Vesper to restructure trade agreements that had favored wealthy houses over common merchants. She partnered with Veron to create a transparent tax system that prevented the kind of corruption Corvin had perpetrated. And slowly the realm began to change. Not overnight, not without resistance, but change nonetheless. Houses that had viewed the crown as a distant authority started seeing it as a partner. Villages that had felt ignored started feeling heard. The borderlands, harsh, unforgiving, built on strength and survival, began developing something it had rarely known: trust. But the final test came 6 months after the rebellion ended. Baron Kellis requested a formal audience, not to negotiate, but to make an announcement. The council chamber was packed when he arrived. Every major house had sent representatives, sensing something significant was about to happen. Kellis stood before Alaric and Rowan's joint thrones, looking older than he had at the wedding, but somehow more solid, more certain. Your Majesties, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber. 6 months ago, I came to the city ready to declare for Greymore. I decided that King Alaric's choices were reckless and that his marriage to a commoner proved he'd lost sight of his duty. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. But I met with Queen Rowan, Kellis continued, and she asked me to give them a chance, to see if their partnership could actually work, to judge them by their actions, not my assumptions. He paused. I stayed neutral. I watched. And I've seen something I didn't expect. He turned to address the full chamber. I've seen a queen who rides into farming villages to root out corruption, a king who risks his life to save hostages instead of negotiating from safety. I've seen trade agreements that benefit common merchants as much as noble houses, I've seen a crown that listens instead of just commands. Kellis's voice strengthened. I've seen a partnership that's made the borderlands stronger, not weaker. More unified, not more divided. He knelt. House Kellis formally declares for the crown, not out of political expediency, not out of fear or obligation, but because you've proven yourselves worthy of our loyalty. The chamber erupted. One by one, other nobles stood. Some knelt immediately, declaring their own houses for the crown. Others remained standing, but their expressions had shifted from skepticism to consideration. The tide had turned completely. When the formal declarations ended, 17 houses had committed their full support. Another dozen had moved from neutral to allied. Only 3 remained in opposition, and they were isolated now, their influence broken. Rowan sat on her throne, watching the most powerful people in the borderlands pledge loyalty to a crown she'd never imagined wearing, and tried not to cry. They'd done it, not through force or fear or political manipulation, but through partnership, through showing up, through proving that another way was possible. That night, Rowan and Alaric escaped to their private chambers, both exhausted and exhilarated. 17 houses, Alaric said, still sounding stunned, including Kellis. I didn't think that was possible. Neither did I. Rowan kicked off her formal shoes and collapsed onto the bed. I'm still not entirely sure it's real. It's real. You made it real. He sat beside her. You took a realm that was tearing itself apart and turned it into something that might actually work. We did that. Together. No, I mean, yes, together. But Rowan, he turned to face her fully. You're the reason this worked. My decision to marry you started the crisis. But your work ended it. The political negotiations, the village visits, the way you showed the realm that power could be used for something other than self-interest. That was you. Rowan sat up. I was just trying to survive, to help, to not completely fail at this impossible job. And in the process, you transformed it. Alaric took her hands. You came here as a wedding planner. You leave today as the queen who reshaped the borderlands. I'm not leaving. I know, but you could. That's what makes this meaningful. You chose to stay, chose to fight, chose to build something instead of walking away when it got hard. Rowan looked at their joined hands, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The impossible wedding, the rebellion, the raid, the negotiations, every terrifying, exhausting, world-changing moment. Do you remember what you asked me? She said quietly. In the cathedral, before any of this started? You asked if I believed in love. I remember. You said it was unreliable. I was wrong. She met his gaze. Love isn't unreliable. It's the most reliable thing there is. When everything else fails, politics, alliances, carefully laid plans, love is what makes us keep fighting, keep trying, keep believing something better is possible. Alaric pulled her close, and they stayed like that for a long time, 2 people who'd gambled everything on an impossible choice and somehow won. The formal coronation took place 2 months later. Technically, Rowan was already queen by virtue of marriage, but Alaric insisted on a proper ceremony, not for politics or tradition, but because he wanted the realm to see what she'd become. The Cathedral of the First Flame was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory, joyful even. Rowan wore a crown forged specifically for her, simpler than Alaric's, but no less significant. It had been crafted from metals donated by every province in the borderlands, melted down and reformed into something new, a symbol of unity built from fractured pieces. As she knelt before the high altar, she caught sight of faces in the crowd. Mira, grinning fiercely. Lady Vesper, looking satisfied. Veyron, actually smiling. Baron Kellis, nodding with respect. And in the very back, half hidden in shadow, a woman in traveling clothes with auburn hair. Lady Alara. She'd come. Their eyes met across the cathedral, and Alara smiled. Not bitter, not resentful, just genuinely happy. Then the officiant was speaking, placing the crown on Rowan's head, and the cathedral erupted in cheers. She stood, and Alaric took her hand, and together they faced the realm they'd fought so hard to save. The reception afterward was the largest gathering the Borderlands had seen in a generation. Every house was represented. Trade guilds sent delegations. Common citizens lined the streets, celebrating not just a coronation, but what it represented, a new era. Late in the evening, Rowan found herself on the same balcony where she'd once stood with Alaric, wondering if the realm would tear itself apart. Alara appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "I thought you might need this," Alara said, offering one. Rowan took it gratefully. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I almost didn't come. But I wanted to see how it ended, or began, I suppose." Alara looked out over the city. "You were right, you know. What you told me in the cathedral before the wedding. You said you'd try to make it worth it, the chaos, the scandal, the upheaval. And did I?" Alara turned to face her. "You built something I never could have. A partnership based on choice instead of obligation. A crown that serves instead of just ruling. A realm that's actually trying to be better." She raised her glass. "So yes, you made it worth it." They drank together in comfortable silence. "What about you?" Rowan asked. "What's next?" "My father wants me to make another political marriage. Rebuild our house's influence." Alara's smile was wry. "But I think I'm going to travel instead. See the Eastern Territories. Maybe write about what I find. Figure out who I am when I'm not being groomed for queenship." "That sounds like freedom." "It does, doesn't it?" Alara set down her glass. "Take care of him, and of yourself, and of this realm you're building." "I will." Alara left, and Rowan stood alone on the balcony, watching Ironhaven settle into night. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, the careful planner who'd built a career on staying invisible, creating perfect moments for other people while carefully avoiding the spotlight. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned to fight, to lead, to stand in the center of the storm instead of orchestrating it from the shadows. She'd lost her anonymity, her quiet life, her carefully constructed safety. But she'd gained something immeasurably more valuable: purpose, partnership, a future she'd helped build with her own hands. "There you are." Alaric stepped onto the balcony, looking exhausted but happy. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Just needed a moment to breathe. Big day." Understatement. She turned to face him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd made different choices? If you'd married Alara like you were supposed to? If I'd just planned the wedding and left?" "Every day. But then I remember what we built instead, and I wouldn't change a single moment." He wrapped his arms around her. "Even the terrifying parts. Even the impossible parts. Because they led here. To this. To us." Music drifted up from the great hall below, celebration continuing into the night. "Dance with me?" Alaric asked. There's no music up here. We'll make our own." So they did. 2 people who defied tradition, survived rebellion, and reshaped a realm dancing on a balcony under stars, creating their own rhythm in the silence. And in the city below, the borderlands, harsh, unforgiving, built on strength and survival, began dreaming of something new. Not just survival, but flourishing. Not just strength, but partnership. Not just endurance, but hope. The planner who'd once built perfect moments for others had finally built the most important one for herself. And in doing so, she'd helped build a future for an entire realm. One choice, one impossible wedding, one woman who refused to let fear dictate her path. And everything changed. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of the borderlands, they would point to the Treaty of Greystone Ridge as the turning point. The moment when endless cycles of violence gave way to cooperation. But the people who lived through it knew differently. The real transformation began in a cathedral, when a wedding planner stepped forward and chose love over safety. When a king reached for her hand and offered freedom instead of obligation. When 2 people decided that the hardest path was also the one worth taking. Everything else, the battles, the negotiations, the reforms that reshaped the realm, flowed from that single moment of courage. Rowan kept her planning ledger from those first 3 weeks in Ironhaven. She stored it in the royal library, preserved behind glass, not as a relic of her old life, but as a reminder that even the most carefully laid plans sometimes need to be torn up and rewritten, that chaos can become creation, that the invisible can become essential, that a woman with no title and no training can stand beside a king and help him build something better than either could have imagined alone. She never forgot where she came from, the eastern provinces, the quiet life, the satisfaction of creating perfect moments from impossible circumstances. But she also never forgot where she'd arrived, standing in the center instead of the shadows, building futures instead of just facilitating them, choosing partnership over safety, love over fear, hope over despair. And on the clear spring morning when their first child was born, a daughter with Alaric's steel-gray eyes and Rowan's stubborn determination, she understood finally and completely. She hadn't just planned a wedding, she'd planned a revolution. And it had been worth every impossible, terrifying, beautiful moment. The borderlands had been built on strength, but it would be sustained by something stronger, the courage to choose differently, the wisdom to build instead of destroy, the love that made two people into partners, and partners into something that could change the world. Rowan held her daughter and looked out the window at Ironhaven, at the city she'd helped save, the realm she'd helped reshape, the future she'd helped build. And she smiled, because the planner who'd once hidden in shadows had learned to stand in the light. And in doing so, she'd helped light the way for everyone else. The story of the wedding planner who became queen, the commoner who defied tradition, the woman who proved that courage and love could reshape a realm. It wasn't written in ancient texts or prophecies. It was written in choices, in moments, in the quiet decision to keep fighting when everything said to give up. And it would echo through generations. A reminder that sometimes the most impossible thing is also the most necessary. That change begins with one person willing to step forward. That the future belongs to those brave enough to build it. Rowan set aside her crown and picked up her daughter, humming an old lullaby from her childhood in the eastern provinces. Outside, the borderlands stretched vast and harsh and beautiful, ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in its violent history, it faced the future not with fear, but with hope.